This subcommittee has come together on a bipartisan basis for the last 4 Congresses to pass a new WORDA bill, and with this hearing, we initiate the tradition again. Let me begin by asking unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit on the subcommittees with the subcommittee today at today's hearing and ask questions, and without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, please keep your microphones muted unless speaking. Should I hear any inadvertent background noise, I will request that the member please mute their microphone. And finally, to insert a document to the record, please have your staff email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I am very pleased that our first hearing of the year is on the development of further legislation to benefit our nation's economy, its environment, and the well-being of communities in every one of our congressional districts. And today we begin the development of a new Water Resources Development Act for 2022, also known as WORDA. I am pleased we will start a hearing from the Biden administration and the Chief of the Army Corps of Engineers. The committee on a bipartisan basis has now completed work on 4 consecutive WORDAs since 2014. Proud accomplishment. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today's hearing marks the beginning of our work on the 5th WORDA, consecutive WORDA. This committee has been successful in enacting a WORDA every 2 years because our members recognize how critical the core work is to meeting the unique water resource needs of our communities. Through biennial enactment of WORDA legislation, this committee has local, regional, and national needs through authorization of a new core project and studies, policies that benefit every corner of the nation. However, all of the projects and studies authorized in WORDA need appropriated funds for the communities to realize the full navigation, flood control, environmental benefits these projects provide. Last year, Congress approved and the President signed into the law the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This critical legislation provides $17.1 billion to the Corps to address backlog of vital construction and operation, as well as maintenance activities on projects throughout the nation. Additionally, the Jobs Act follows the Biden administration's fiscal year 2022 budget request, which I remind my colleagues was the largest single budget request for the Corps in history. I am pleased that the Biden administration recommended sufficient funds to complete a dam safety project at Whittier Narrows in my district, and trust and hope that the Corps will keep that in mind as it develops a spend plan for the funds from the Jobs Act. The combined funding for the Jobs Act and annual appropriations and emergency supplemental bills is historic by any definition. This will allow for a game-changing, once-in-a-generation investment in our critical water resources infrastructure. This critical funding will enable the Corps to carry out authorized projects across the country, which will finally help communities to address local flooding needs, will ensure sustainable and predictable water supply needs for arid regions, and help to restore our nation's environmental treasures. In addition, we have all seen the impact that the COVID-19 has had on our economy and supply chains. These investments will advance projects, especially dredging in our coastal ports and inland waterways that are so very critical to our economy. These projects will make it easier for American businesses to export their goods around the world and fuel our economy for the future. I am very pleased to have the top leadership of the Army Corps of Engineers before this committee today. Both Assistant Secretary Connor and Lieutenant General Spellman bring years of experience and knowledge in managing the nation's water resources needs. I welcome both of you here today and look forward to hearing from you on the priorities we should consider for the next WORDA, plans you have for story funding, including Jobs Act, and now updates on implementing policies from the previous WORDA, including one that I authored to review adding water supply to your 4 mission areas. The committee also thanks you for transmitting the annual report to Congress on future water resources development for 2021, or the 7001 report to us this past November. These statutorily required reports help us as we seek to authorize studies and projects in WARDA. And I hope that you will both commit today that the 2022 report will be submitted to Congress on time at the beginning of February of this year. That's just around the corner. And as I stated earlier, this is our first hearing on WARDA 22, and our subcommittee plans to hear additional perspectives in the weeks and months to follow. I strongly encourage every member and their staff to work with the local core districts to learn about projects in their communities. And I am fully committed to continuing our track record and completing another bipartisan WARDA. And I value and appreciate the cooperation of the ranking member and their staff. Now I'm pleased to yield to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Rouser, for any statement he may have.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you holding this hearing today, and I'd also like to thank our witnesses for being with us, although remotely, and understandably so. Today's hearing marks the public kickoff phase of the House of Representatives drafting of a Water Resources Development Act for 2022. This is one of the most important pieces of legislation I think we can all agree that we do here on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Every day, people across our country read stories and hear news reports about how Washington is broken. However, the WARDA process is something that works, and one of the reasons why I look forward to this new year. These have not only been consistent, but also bipartisan. In fact, since 2014, Congress, as the chairman said, has passed a WARDA bill every 2 years. The WARDA 2020 passed the House by voice vote. And one thing we hear frequently from those who depend on these bills is how thankful they are that we work together in a bipartisan manner and do so through regular order. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle here on this committee, subcommittee, and the full House to keep this institutional tradition intact. Throughout this process, we will hear from folks all around the country representing a wide variety of interests. However, it makes sense to hear first from those who actually direct and do the work, the United States Army Corps of Engineers and the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. There are several ways that the Corps and the Assistant Secretary helped Congress develop a water resources bill. Perhaps most notable among them are the individual chiefs' reports for projects in the annual 7001 report, named after the section of WARDA 2014 that requires an annual project list to be provided to Congress that represents non-federal entity input into the Corps process. Look forward to hearing from the Assistant Secretary and the Chief of Engineers on these reports, and I also look forward to discussing best moves forward with the 2022 WARDA. Again, thank you to our witnesses, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rouser. At this time, I'm pleased to recognize and yield to the chair of the full committee, Mr. DeFasi, for any thoughts he may have.
Thanks, Madam Chair. As has been stated earlier, was former Chairman Bill Schuster, who started the tradition and the commitment to doing a Water Resources Development Act every 2 years, beginning in 14. We continued that tradition last year, and I fully intend that we will continue again this year. Last year, as was noted, it did pass the House by voice vote. Actually, I believe it passed the House twice. And we negotiated with the Committee of Jurisdiction in the Senate, but even then the Senate couldn't take up a bill that passed the House unanimously, and we had to do it in the year-end omnibus budget deal. Hopefully this year the Senate will be able to partner and work with us on the bill, and so that we can better develop the policy and the projects as we move forward. The last WARDA had 48 chiefs reports. That was, as far as I know, more than any other time previously. That was more than in 16 and 18 combined, which shows that the Corps certainly has the capability to address the needs of the nation, to design projects to meet our needs and restore some of our water infrastructure, some of which dates to the 1800s, and some of that is very critical infrastructure. The Corps has been really pathetically underfunded for decades. The backlog of critical infrastructure projects has grown and grown to, tens of billions of dollars. And, we've allowed for too long our infrastructure, critical infrastructure, whether we're talking about the inland waterways, the ports, the harbors, or, flood protection, other issues. We get a C minus from the Society of Civil Engineers. We can do better than that. And there's a lot of promise now. The 17.1 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law, 11 billion dedicated specifically to project construction. This will help our ports reduce, the backlog at our ports, reduce the price of goods, will provide enhanced protection for our communities from flood and storm risks, and put the nation on a path for future generations for sustainable infrastructure. The Corps only has a couple more days to finalize where those bipartisan infrastructure law funds will be spent, and I'm hopeful to hear more about that today. We will be following very carefully the focus, the implementation of this law, and the policy changes that were dictated in the last few WRDA bills. Since 1996, things take a little while around here sometimes way too long. I started working with Bud Schuster, that is Bill's dad, on the creation of a harbor maintenance trust fund to use the dollars, the tax dollars that have been dedicated since the Reagan era to our port infrastructure, which had been sequestered in the Treasury so that they could be used for illusory deficit offset or spent elsewhere, even though the balance did accrue to the Treasury, nearly $10 billion. And we finally got that done last year in WRDA 2020. It certainly, as the pandemic showed how overburdened and inadequate our ports are in this international economy, it couldn't have been more timely. And, I want that we will continue to better support the Corps, in its expertise, make them accessible and available to any community who needs it, even though those with unique challenges, economic disadvantages, those under severe threat from climate impacts or pollution, as we heard from Mr. Garamendi before the committee met, or other issues that have been raised in Florida and elsewhere. We need to build back better in a way that's resilient, that we're innovative, we can meet future challenges, and we don't leave any parts of the country behind, including rural areas, tribal disadvantaged communities. Madam Chair, thank you for your leadership. And I want to thank Assistant Secretary Connor and General Spellman for joining us today, and look forward to the dialogue as we move forward with this hearing. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman DeFazio, for your kind words, and very well put. Thank you very much. Now we will proceed to hear from witnesses that are testifying today. I ask the witnesses to please, do you have your cameras on? Leave them on for the duration of the panel. Thank you for being here and participating. On today's panel, we have the Honorable Michael L. Connor, Assistant Secretary, Army of Civil Works, Lieutenant General Scott A. Spellman, Chief of Engineers and Commanding General for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Without objection, your prepared statements will be entered into the record on our two witnesses and are asked to limit their remarks to 5 minutes. Assistant Secretary Connor, welcome. You may proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, Chairman DeFazio, members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today regarding WRDA 2022. As you introduced me, I'm Mike Connor. I'm the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, a position I've been in since November 29th of last year. I've submitted my written testimony and will summarize a few highlights here. The Army Civil Works Program is the nation's largest water resources program. It serves 3 primary missions: flood and storm damage reduction, commercial navigation, and aquatic ecosystem restoration. It also addresses a host of other water resource and infrastructure needs as directed by Congress. The Corps of Engineers have contributed significantly to the nation's well-being. I appreciate the recognition of that fact here. It supports the economy with its infrastructure and protects and improves the lives of Americans with actions to address flood risk, environmental protection needs, even drought. Today, the Army Corps is committed to the national effort to work as partners with communities to improve their resilience to extreme weather events and other challenges related to a changing climate. As the President has made clear, the administration is focused on increasing infrastructure and ecosystem resilience and decreasing climate risk for communities based on the best available science, promoting environmental justice in disadvantaged, underserved, and rural communities, and creating good-paying jobs. The Army Civil Works Program will continue to work within its own authorities to tackle the climate crisis at home. We also participate in a whole of government effort, including the Interagency Water Subcabinet and the Coastal Resilience Interagency Working Group. WRDA 2022 is where we can continue to ensure the authorities necessary to implement the administration's priorities. The President has set a goal that 40% of the overall benefits of federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities, the Justice 40 initiative. I am committed to working with Lieutenant General Spellman to seek opportunities to secure environmental justice and spur economic opportunity for disadvantaged communities that disproportionately experience the adverse effects of climate change. I should also make clear the Army's role in supporting a broad range of infrastructure and landscapes. The Army works with our nation's coastal ports to maintain their channels, operates and maintains the inland waterways of commerce, supports state, tribal, and local flood risk management activities, restores significant aquatic ecosystems, and operates and maintains multi-purpose dams and the reservoirs behind them. It's a great story, but much of the water resources infrastructure that the Army Corps owns and operates was constructed over 75 years ago and will require significant investments to maintain. Thank you for the significant resources Congress has already provided, as referenced earlier. As the Army works on policy and administrative changes to improve infrastructure development and regulatory responsiveness, my staff and I are looking at authorities, policies, regulations, and procedures to identify opportunities for increased efficiency and effectiveness. This is particularly necessary given the substantial resources provided to the Corps this past year and the importance Congress ascribes to our programs. We want to ensure that Army Civil Works is using its significant capabilities in an equitable manner that incorporates natural and nature-based infrastructure solutions into resiliency efforts, that it reduces redundancy, and that it delegates authority for decision-making to the appropriate level. I'm committed to working closely with the Chief of Engineers and his commanding officers to position the Civil Works programs for continued success. With respect to significant matters of interest to the committee, we are working with OMB to finalize the proposed rule to implement WIFIA as provided for in the 2021 Energy and Water Appropriations Act. This proposed rule would implement a new federal credit program to support investment in non-federal dam safety projects through credit assistance to maintain, upgrade, and repair non-federal dams. This new federal credit program will provide another way for non-federal dam owners and managers to enhance the safety of their dams while also addressing water supply, energy, and environmental needs in a changing climate. The Army has completed 18 WRDA 2020 implementation guidance documents and made substantial progress on the remaining guidance. I know that's an interest to all of you. Certain provisions may require rulemaking. You have my commitment that WRDA 2020 implementation will be a priority, and we will continue to complete the remaining implementation guidance documents and rulemakings. The Army is also making progress on key regulatory issues. Together, we are working closely with EPA to develop a durable definition of waters of the United States, informed by science, experience, and expertise to protect all interests dependent on clean water. The Army also lifted the temporary pause on finalizing Section 404 permit decisions in November 2021 and is working to resolve the vast majority of outstanding jurisdictional determination decisions. The Army is also moving forward to coordinate with certifying authorities on water quality certifications that are potentially impacted by the recent vacatur of the 2020 Clean Water Act Section 401 rule. Thank you, Madam Chair, and all the committee members. I look forward to answering remaining questions after General Spellman's testimony. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And now we will proceed to hear from Lieutenant General Spellman. You may proceed.
Chairman DeFazio, Chairwoman Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, and distinguished members of the committee, good morning to all of you. And I'm honored to testify before you today with Mr. Connor And thank you for the opportunity to discuss our execution of and your oversight of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works Program. I look forward to discussing the status of implementation of recent Water Resources Development Acts, as well as questions the committee may have regarding anticipated legislation for 2022. Most importantly, I look forward to continuing to work with this committee, Congress, and the administration to address the nation's water resources infrastructure needs. The infrastructure authorized by the Water Resources Development Acts and implemented by the Corps are critical for this nation's economic growth and national security, and ultimately they benefit the well-being of all American citizens. We greatly appreciate the committee's continuing commitment, as mentioned, to enacting WRDAs on a 2-year cycle. This predictability has enabled critical water resources projects to be authorized for study and construction. This session has also provided regular updates to our authorities, modernizing our methodologies and enhancing flexibility in the policies we utilize to execute our mission. We maintain a dedicated commitment to our partners, the engagement we have held with stakeholders to gain their input in shaping guidance for implementation of these authorities. While the focus of this hearing may be on the proposed legislation being considered by this committee, it's important, I believe, to acknowledge the recent significant growth in the Corps Civil Works program that we have experienced over the past several years. Madam Chairwoman, the challenge for us in the Corps is that we are structured, we're organized, we're staffed for what has historically been a $20 to $22 billion program for the Corps. And that's just not civil works. That's the work we do for the VA. That's the work we do for FEMA. That's what we're doing in 110 countries around the world today for our combatant commanders out in the field. Our current program is $84 billion and it's growing. So our Civil Works program has seen the greatest growth of all these programs these past 5 years, going from a $7 billion annual program to an annual budget of more than $48 billion when you add in supplemental appropriations. This funding provides the Corps with a once-in-a-generation window of opportunity to deliver water resource infrastructure programs and projects that will positively impact the lives of communities across this great nation. It's an opportunity we're taking advantage of to transform our organization and decision-making processes to safely finish quality projects on time and within budget. We are taking major steps to proactively identify risks to execute our mandates, and then developing measures to reduce, resolve, or eliminate these risks. Measures such as accelerating recruitment through direct hiring authorities and transforming our workplace to attract and retain the best talent, which will help us in fortifying our technical expertise to effectively develop and implement infrastructure projects. We are also combining traditional and alternative delivery concepts that allow us to develop additional contracting tools that enhance our partnership efforts. By evolving our programs, planning, and operations, we are able to overcome impacts from important drivers like global climate change. Considering adaptation and mitigation responses to climate change together, we have improved the resilience of natural and core-built water resources infrastructure. Integrating adaptation and resilience into our design processes has enhanced the effectiveness of the Corps Civil Works projects, reducing risk to vulnerable communities. Additionally, the Corps continues to provide meaningful engagement opportunities for overburdened and underserved communities and Native American tribes to encourage and enable participation in decisions that impact their communities. The Corps does not accomplish anything by itself. We use our engineering expertise and rely on our relationships to develop innovative approaches to address some of the most pressing water resource challenges we face as a nation today. My top priorities include identifying the highest priority investments and that we safely deliver quality projects on time and within budget. I strongly feel that to achieve this vision, we must execute our comprehensive research and development strategy to meet the challenges of the 21st century. We will accomplish this strategy with our U.S. and international partners in government, in industry, and academia. From climate change to warfighting, from overextended infrastructure to cybersecurity, there are no shortages of challenges that we will require bold new research and development to solve. Madam Chairwoman, I found my complete written testimony with your staff that identifies the projects proposed in chiefs reports and post-authorization change reports to date since the enactment of WRDA 2020. I also included a brief summary for each project's purpose, total cost, as well as the federal and non-federal cost share. And thank you, Chairwoman Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, and members of the committee. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, General Spellman. That is very nicely put. We thank both our witnesses, but now we'd like to move on to our member questions. And each member will be recognized for 5 minutes. If there are additional questions, we may have an additional round as necessary. Chairman DeFazio will begin the questioning. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To both the Secretary and the General, I want to thank you for the work you've done to extend the bids you have on the critical Coos Bay North Bend project to match with the timeline of OMB approving your work plan. Are we on track to get that done this week? Either one can respond.
Sir, I'll start. We have successfully extended the bid of both offers to the 1st of April. So I think that gives us plenty of flexibility in moving forward.
Right, but the question would be your entire work plan approval by OMB. I spoke to the acting head of OMB last week, and there seemed to be some confidence that we could have approval this week. Have you heard anything?
Oh, yes, Mr. Chairman, we've heard a lot, been involved in a lot of discussions. I think we're on track. Yes.
Okay, that's good to know, because that's very important for the nation. And as we rebuild, particularly, I want to look at the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. General, you talked about the challenges of your long overdue, but significantly increased investment in projects and obligations. In terms of the being able to commit the harbor maintenance funds, I guess there's sort of two questions, and one would be, on the West Coast, we've had chronic issues with availability of dredging, and I just am hopeful that we're going to find a way to address that. And then the second thing would be, as we rebuild these failing jetties, breakwaters, I would assume that we are rebuilding them with an eye toward the future, toward higher levels, higher sea levels, and more violent storms. Is that correct?
So that's correct, and you experienced that more than anyone with the storms and the violent water we have out on the Oregon coast. So for example, the Coos Bay jetties that we're talking about here, those will be designed with climate change and adaptation in mind.
That's good. That's good to know. On the Columbia River, Secretary Connor, I wrote in December. We've heard from stakeholders, and the Corps has asserted numerous times that they have the existing legal authorities that relate to future flood damage reduction and protection in the Columbia River Basin. As you know, the treaty has expired. Canada has been dragging its feet. The State Department has been, shall we say, not exactly focused on this either. And this causes tremendous concern when with the expiration of the treaty, when we have a potential for assuming rather large obligations for future flood risk on the Columbia. Can we expect a meaningful response on that soon?
Yes, we're, Mr. Chairman, we are starting those discussions in earnest based on getting input on the discussions that are ongoing with Canada at this point in time. I think our first instinct is that we do have the necessary authority, but we are doing a deeper dive on those flood management services that may change in response to how the treaty process negotiation plays out. So we're taking a deep look at that, and we'll keep in constant contact as the discussions evolve. So we may have a response in the near term that may be evolving over the next several months. So we want that to be an active dialogue with you and interested members on both sides of the aisle.
Right. As you know, this is a tremendous concern to the entire Pacific Northwest, and I look forward to that response. Just one other quick point. We authorized you to look at helping design and deal with non-federal dams. I don't think that authority extended to diking, did it? Because there are areas, historically the Corps was involved in building and diking, particularly throughout the Northwest in areas of flood danger. And then in time lost to history, they turned those over to local diking districts, which just kind of disappeared ultimately, and people didn't even know in many cases they were protected by dikes. In the case of one river in my district a few years ago, does that authority, I don't extend to providing some assistance to these districts also, or is that something Congress would need to further authorize?
Take a first cut at that.
Yes, sir.
I've got two thoughts on that. I think the authority that you're referring to is the WIFIA program, which has been limited to our ability to work with non-federal dam
Right.
owners and work on safety issues. So I don't believe, I'll double check this, that it extends to dikes.
Okay.
But need to double check on that. And we're moving forward with the process of initiating rulemaking to implement that authority. I do think we have authority elsewhere to work on levees, dikes, through maybe the emergency response program or disaster preparedness program, but I'll let General Spellman correct me.
No, sir, you have it exactly. Sir, I would have to go back and double check whether or not the water infrastructure program or WIFIA applies to dikes. But we do have other authorities, as you know, where we can help out non-federal entities on the maintenance and repair of those structures.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Thank you both for your testimony, Madam Chair. You're back.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio. Mr. Razo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again to our witnesses for being here. I appreciate your work for the country very much. I've got a couple of questions with regard to my district specifically, but before I get to that, with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill this last year, several agencies, including the Corps, obviously, received funding to advance infrastructure projects across the country. However, despite this push for infrastructure, of course, projects still face significant bureaucratic and permitting hurdles that can cause years of delays. How's the Corps working to implement this legislation and create efficiencies in its processes to expedite critical infrastructure projects?
Sure, I'll start.
Sure.
So we
Sounds good.
recently renewed 57 nationwide permits following extensive feedback from the public. And that will certainly enable accelerated delivery of projects with all the appropriate safeguards for the environment. We acknowledge we have more work to do on that front, and we're wide open to any additional recommendations that we get from the administration or members of Congress. So I would just highlight that as one example on how we're working hard to get these projects in the ground.
And I would just add to that, there has been a lot of changes in the regulatory world, as we all know, and I'm sure will be discussed more today. So I think I appreciate the fact stepping into this role that the Corps' primary goal has been regulatory certainty and efficiency in which it carries out its regulatory actions. And I see that with nationwide permits that General Spellman referred to, and we will be seeking to do that as we move forward with waters of the U.S. and other regulatory changes that we need to deal with, that we need to go through the processes to get to some durable rules and regulatory certainty so people can do their business.
I'll come to that, back to that in more detail later. General Spellman, the Coastal Storm Risk Management Project at Wrightsville Beach, which I know you're very familiar with, has existed and received assistance from the Army Corps since 1986. During that time, as you know, that particular beach has used the same bar site for its sand, but due to a recent rule change at the Department of Interior, the Corps can no longer use that historic bar site, and we'll have to go offshore for that necessary sand. Will the Corps have an offshore bar site identified and ready to be permitted before the 2022-2023 project season? What's your analysis of that?
Yes, sir. So in short, the answer is yes, sir. We're going through the permitting action now for that offshore borrow site. We expect to have that permit complete by September of this year, which will allow us in turn to do a quick contracting action to get after that work.
As you're also aware, the Army Corps had previously worked with the towns of North Topsail Beach and Surf City to establish a coastal storm risk management project. The planning for this project went through many phases, had multiple cost estimates over the years, but the bottom line is that price tag was high enough to where the town of North Topsail decided to withdraw. So the bottom line question, is the Corps able to move forward with this project despite the town of North Topsail removing itself? And if not, what steps are going to be necessary to ensure that Surf City has what it needs?
Yes, sir. So my staff is completing now what we call a validation report. My discretionary authority on this project, a project that Congress authorized, is I can move forward as long as there's not about a 20% change in scope. And so that's what we're validating right now. If it's not 20%, sir, we will move out. Congress was generous and gave us the fully funded that project in the Defense Recovery Act of 2019. And I understand North Topsail Beach, for their portion of the bridge, they're moving forward under a FEMA program to seek the funds to implement the project on their beach.
How soon do you think all that can be done?
Yeah, sir. So I should have the validation report complete in March of this year, and then we are ready to move forward. As I said, this has been fully funded, and it's just a matter of getting it under contract.
Thank you. Since the enactment of WARDA 2020, the committee has received 14 chiefs reports for potential projects. And certainly we appreciate the good work done by the Corps to get those completed and submitted. Do you have an estimate of how many more we can expect and when we can expect them, especially before completion of the next WARDA?
Congressman, we're at 14 now, as you mentioned. I have 7 more that I will sign before May of this year that I am high confidence we'll get those into WARDA 22. And then on top of that, there are another 7 that we are working to pull to the left so that we can get them in front of you for consideration. So, sir, it may be upwards of 28.
What about post-authorization change reports?
Sir, I have that number, and I will follow up with you and get you that.
Is there anything else that the committee should expect to receive that we don't know about at the moment?
Sir, we've completed hundreds of legislative drafting services. Those continue to come in, and of course, we're always open to discussing any recommendations or tools that the Corps or the Secretary would like to see that would better enable us to deliver on this massive program that you've trusted us with.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rouser. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. This will be the first word for the Biden administration, and we've heard that the Corps now has plenty of funding towards the missions. Mr. Connor and General Spellman, what are the priorities of the administration and the Army Corps of Engineers for the Water Resources Development Act of 2022?
I'll take a first cut at that, Madam Chair. Obviously, in the set of priorities that we have are those identified in the 7001 reports. The one that you noted was moved forward and sent to Congress last November, and we are working on that one for FY 2022, as you noted in your opening comments. So we're working expeditiously to get that report up to Congress. Beyond that, we are looking at opportunities to further the administration's priorities, and those are to enhance our ability to build resilience with respect to our projects activities, to enhance environmental justice and our ability to move forward with economically disadvantaged and rural communities, as well as moving forward in our role in helping facilitate the nation's supply chain and dealing with those issues. Now, there are a lot of provisions that we are in the midst of implementing from WARDA 2020 in those areas. I think the bipartisan bill that was put together really moved forward a number of those initiatives. We've got some specific thoughts on other opportunities, particularly working with tribal communities. I'll turn it over to General Spellman, as this is a tag team, as you know.
Yes, Madam Chair, when I would say our priorities in the Corps or those of Mr. Connor and the administration, I would just say specifically for execution, my priority for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is to employ the tools and authorities that you have given us in this upcoming WARDA and previous WARDAs to their maximum effect, and that we safely deliver quality projects on time and within budget. And as Mr. Connor said, we think there are a number of tools that the committee could consider that would enable us in this WARDA to do that even better.
Can I just add to that? I think, we've talked about it, and I think Chairman DeFazio mentioned this. We need to be innovative in our approach to deal with the challenges that we have in the area of water resources in all the range of our programs. And a lot of that is driven by a changing climate. But as General Spellman noted, the volume of work that is expected of this agency, which we welcome, requires innovation in how we approach that work. And the tools from contracting to hiring that help us carry that out, I think, is an area that we are looking at very closely, and Congress is doing its role, not just with the volume of resources, but the innovation with respect to the trust funds, the Inland Waterways Trust Funds and Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund. We very much appreciate the added flexibility and the incentives to use those funds more. I think it's a combination of all these elements where we have to be innovative.
Then does that include checking out for supply shortages? For the Army Corps to carry out the projects?
Ma'am, are you referring to supply chain?
Yeah, supply chain or water supply.
Well, no, supply chain of equipment and
Oh,
stuff that you were gonna need for your projects.
So ma'am, I'll just give you a quick vignette. I had to call the Air Force here about 2 weeks ago on a Milcon project that we were delayed on because I could not get 3-inch screws to hold insulation and metal roofing down on 3 KC-46 hangars at Tinker Air Force Base. I have a few select shortages across the country like that, but thankfully I have not experienced that in the Civil Works program so far.
Well, then, Mr. Connor, I'm glad you're bringing your experience in Western Water to Corps. Been working diligently for many years using reservoirs in the West for more effective water supply. Where 2020 included provision I authored adding water supply to your primary mission. What is the status of this review and when do you anticipate being able to share the results?
A quick response, and I'll turn it over for General Spellman for more details. I believe we are, the report that's due on water supply as a primary mission function is due in June of this year. And so we are on track. I know it's being put together and we anticipate being able to deliver that report on the timeline that was identified in WRDA 2020. But I do want to talk to the, your sense, Madam Chair, and we've worked together a long time on these issues and knowing the innovative approaches to water supply. I share that view completely. I see and mentioned in my opening comments, I think I've been pleasantly surprised in understanding not just the magnitude of the overall Corps' mission, but how it contributes to addressing water supply and drought in specific watersheds. And there's a way to do it with respect to how we operate our reservoirs, how we can better use and move water out, still maintain that flood control primary responsibility, but move water in a way that allows, as you know, in Southern California, we've done this at a couple facilities to deviations where we release water and can help manage our aquifer recharge systems. We've done that in New Mexico. This was a WRDA 2020 provision involving Abiquiu Dam, where we can look at work needing to be done on another Bureau Reclamation facility, El Vado Dam, but how do we make use of Abiquiu Dam and space there to help make up that water supply, to help manage that system, to help address the environmental needs in the Rio Chama in New Mexico. I think these opportunities are real. They're necessary in a changing climate. We do have a role in the West. I'll just add one other area. Our environmental infrastructure program, in my view, has just simply taken off with respect to communities understanding the benefits of working with the Corps to address aquifer recharge, water reuse needs, adding to water supply, building redundancy as drought impacts systems like California Bay Delta, as well as Colorado River. Communities are looking to the Corps to help build facilities that address those needs. And so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Connor. My time has long been up. I now recognize Mr. Babin. Mr. Babin, you're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member Rouser, and thank you for our witnesses, to our witnesses for being here today with us. Assistant Secretary Connor, welcome to the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. I look forward to working with you now that your nomination has been confirmed. I'd also like to personally extend an invitation to you to visit the greater Houston area as soon as possible to view some of the great work our ports and the Corps' Galveston District are doing, working together on projects like the Port of Houston Channel Improvement Project and the Galveston Bay to Sabine's Coastal Storm Risk Management and Ecosystem Restoration Project. And General Spellman visited last year, and it helps very much to see firsthand the volume and the variety of commerce that our port handles for our nation's economy. And General Spellman, it's great to see you here again. I'd like to thank you for your service to our country and commend you on the attention you paid both to my district, 36 Texas, and the state of Texas during your tenure in the Army Corps of Engineers. And my constituents and I are very happy to see you in front of us again. I'm pleased that we have the opportunity today to be kicking off our discussions on the Water Resources Development Act. In years past, we've had the opportunity to use this legislation for inland waterway cost share adjustments to promote capital investment projects, incorporating flood risk management features in Orange County to mitigate surge flooding, dredging and widening of the port at Cedar Bayou, enhancing the Sabine-Neches waterway, and expanding, of course, the Port of Houston Ship Channel. We're very excited to continue and expand upon this work in WRDA 2022. As you know, I have the privilege of representing Southeast Texas from Houston over to Louisiana to the border, which in my district includes 4 ports. I'm very proud to have helped lead the effort alongside other Houston delegation members to see through the successful authorization and appropriation to dredge and widen the Houston Ship Channel. And to expound upon that victory, we were able to secure $19 million and a New Start designation to begin construction of this incredibly important project. And most recently, the Port and Corps signed a project partnership agreement. This was a huge win as the Port of Houston is critical to our nation's supply chain and the #1 ranked port in the nation in waterborne tonnage, sustains 3 million American jobs, 802 million in U.S. economic value, and generates $38 billion in federal, state, and local tax revenues. And with the process having begun to dredge and widen the channel in Houston, the port has requested approval for the Corps to maintain the improved channel in Galveston Bay and has submitted a package showing that it meets the Corps standards for federal maintenance requirements. So, Assistant Secretary Connor and General Spellman, my question to both of you is this. The port needs a decision from the Corps and an agreement to maintain the channel before it can start construction of the next part of our project, currently scheduled for April 2022, this year. Will you work with the port to deliver a decision by March so that it does not impact the current schedule for construction and delay our project? I was very proud to work with Assistant Secretary R.D. James on several Texas issues during his tenure, and I look forward to now working with you both and continuing to improve our port and water infrastructure as we explore priorities for the Water Resources Development Act. But would you give us kind of what your ideas are and let us and tell us by March if this can happen?
Sure, General Spellman. I'll start. I spoke with Colonel Bale and General Beck earlier this week. That 204 package is with the region. We will expedite. We'll get that up to headquarters for our review and over to Mr. Connor for his consideration. So I don't have any issues in meeting the March timeline.
Excellent. That's great. And Mr. Secretary?
Absolutely. My goal is to not let things sit around in my office and on my desk. So we'll work expeditiously on that package, Congressman. And I appreciate the invitation. It's on the radar screen, absolutely, to get down in your neck of the woods, understand the value and just the infrastructure in general. So I'll look forward to doing that.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And General, I appreciate you coming as well. So thank you, and I'll yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Babin. Thank you very much for your questions. And now we turn to Mr. Huffman. You're recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank our administration witnesses for sharing their priorities for this year's WRDA. As many others have said, it's great that WRDA is something that we've been able to do under Democratic and Republican majorities, under Democratic and Republican administrations on a very consistent and timely basis, and we want to continue that. So we have the opportunity in this year's WRDA to build on the successful bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and historic $17 billion that we've invested in the Corps of Engineers. We are finally unlocking the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, as Chair DeFazio so eloquently talked about, increasing investments in our overburdened ports and waterways. And so WRDA 2022 really offers us a great chance to put those dollars to good use. And in my district, we see some examples of what happens when that Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund is unlocked and those dollars are put to good use. The Petaluma River was silted in, pretty much unnavigable. The recreation even was difficult. Certainly, commercial navigation had ground to a halt because this channel had not been dredged in 17 years. And last year, that dredging was completed and the river came back to life. There was commercial navigation, there was recreation all over the place. We even had a lighted boat parade this holiday season on the Petaluma River. So we've seen the kind of transformative difference it makes when these dollars get to work in our communities. And I hope the 2022 word of the Corps in my district will prioritize investments in projects like the feasibility study for raising the dam at Coyote Valley Dam and Lake Mendocino. And then we've got some other shallow dredging needs, the San Rafael Canal. We need to move forward with the phase 2 of the Hamilton Wetlands Restoration Project at Belmarin Keys and continue to implement the Section 1122 Beneficial Use Pilot Project on San Francisco Bay. But thanks to the 2020 WRDA, these increased investments are really making a difference. And so I want to focus my question for Secretary Connor on this. One of the big challenges we have, even when we unlock the funding for the Corps to do these projects, is the lack of dredging capacity on the West Coast. We are uniquely dependent on the Corps itself because the private fleet just hasn't provided the kind of assets that you see in other places like the East Coast. And so if the Essayons is in dry dock repairs, if another, one of the other few assets that the Corps has is in some other part of the country and we have a critical need, we are just out of luck. And if we don't have the equipment, obviously these projects just can't happen. So Secretary Connor, congratulations on your confirmation. We're glad you're there and thanks for being with us today. But I want to ask you if you have thoughts now that we've unlocked the money from the trust fund, what can we do to address this critical vulnerability that we face on the West Coast?
Thank you, Congressman Huffman. I think I'll just give you my view in my short tenure. Dredging is a new issue that I've dealt with. I do understand the East Coast versus West Coast distinction, the need to maintain our dredging fleet. Absolutely. As far as the details, I'm going to turn it over to General Spellman.
Sir, if I could just add a few details. I have the opportunity to meet with the 6 major CEOs and presidents of the dredge industry each year. Just met with them a few weeks ago, right before the holidays. The investment that Congress is making in our ports and waterways, it is forcing us to take our coordination, our scheduling with industry to a new level, and we're working hard on that. Industry is also bringing on new vessels into their fleet this year, and over the next 5 years, they all have capital investment strategies that they're executing. But I think if they were in the room today, they would also tell you, each of them, that they currently have vessels tied up to docks around the country. I think once we get the president's budget on the street, once we see the project approvals for the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the IDA supplemental, all those floating plants will be back out in the water working again.
Would you support specific funding for new Corps dredge assets on the West Coast?
Sir, we replace our dredge assets with we don't come to Congress for that. We have a revolving fund, our PRIP fund, and we're working replacement for each of those vessels as we speak.
All right. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Well, thank you, Mr. Huffman. Thank you very much. Ms. Johnson of Texas, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. And let me express my appreciation for you holding this meeting for today. It has been most encouraging to have worked closely over the years with the Corps of Engineers in the North Texas District Office. Texas is a massive state, and I have a residence in a very dry area. Although we're coastal, several hundred miles away. And so we have to worry about flooding. And so it's been encouraging actually to work closely over the years with the Corps of Engineers as we have addressed various areas at times and areas for flooding. That includes such projects as the Dallas floodway, to stem the flooding in Louisville Lake and stop flooding and mudslides in Joe Pool Lake. So I just want to express my appreciation. We are now also pleased that the Dallas Water Gardens, an outstanding flood mitigation and stormwater runoff project that I'm working to try to get help and funding for. But we also have a unique study going on now where we have brought all the stakeholders at every level of government together to look at what we can do together to prevent flooding, which includes our Corps, because our Corps of Engineers are instructed for the most part to clean up after floods. But I'm very appreciative of the North Texas staff making sure that they're involved. Because if we can prevent flooding, we save a lot of money and a lot of loss. And so I guess what I want to ask them today is that are they aware of the progress that we're making in that study group?
And-
The flood prevention.
Yeah, ma'am, I'll start. As you know, you're referring to the Opportunity Watershed Study. We know we need a new start authority and funding to proceed on that formally. But what we're doing to lean ahead, we're using authority under our floodplain management services to build the models now that will allow us to do the analysis when we receive that new start and funding to do the actual. So we're not standing by waiting. We're using the tools we have and the authorities we have now to move on a very important work as you described.
Well, thank you very much. I have no further questions, Madam Chair. I want to just express my appreciation for them staying in touch and working with us in this unique area. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Now, I'm sorry, but I must have skipped over a couple of folks. Mr. Garrett Graves, I'm sorry, you're next, and then followed by Mr. Bost.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope that wasn't indicative of our relationship. I want to thank the witnesses for testimony today. We have a number of issues that I wanted to try and cover, and so just ask you if you could please try and keep answers concise. That would be helpful. So first, we have a number of projects that I've had the opportunity to speak with both of you about, and I appreciate y'all's efforts, but the Committee project, which is north of Baton Rouge, and the West Shore project in the river parishes in South Louisiana, both of these projects have had schedule slippage issues, some of them related to real estate acquisition. So I'm not saying that this is entirely the Corps of Engineers' fault. In some cases, this is the state of Louisiana's fault for land acquisition. I just want to ask both of you, please keep this on the front burner. These projects, one of them dates back to the early 1970s, the other one, the early 1980s. These are the types of projects that I think give the Corps of Engineers a bad name. They must be prioritized and move forward. I have a question related to the hurricane supplemental. Again, we've discussed this, but significant funds were provided in that legislation. We believe that a few $1 billion is ultimately going to be invested to address many of the recovery issues like debris removal and dredging of navigation channels, as well as building some of the resilience projects. Those funds have been in the bank now for, I think, 104 days. We have not had an allocation. Just wanted to push you again on getting an answer there.
Absolutely. Real quick, Congressman. We've been looking at that in conjunction with the work plan we're doing with IIJ, trying to manage all this. It's very much on the front burner now. I think you'll be hearing very soon on the disaster supplemental and the investments in Louisiana.
Secretary, thank you. I want to remind you on this one that those funds have really been limited in scope. And so it's not like you're out there having the opportunity to do things all over the country. These projects are specifically tied back to Hurricane Ida. And so I just, remind you that there shouldn't be a ton of discretion that's exercised in this case. Another one I wanted to talk about is Section 213 of WRDA 2020. we did a lower Mississippi River management study, and y'all are both very familiar with the challenges we've had with managing water in the Mississippi River system, draining Montana, New York, Canadian provinces, and the challenges that has caused throughout the entire Mississippi River basin. The Lower Mississippi River Comprehensive Study, again, Section 213 of 2020 WRDA, the way that the Corps has interpreted it, you now have 7 non-federal sponsors, 7 states, from Kentucky and Missouri down to Louisiana, including my friend Mr. Westerman from Arkansas. As you know, having 1 non-federal sponsor is complex enough. Coming up with an interpretation that requires a non-federal cost share and 7 non-federal sponsors, we know that effectively is going to prevent this from moving forward. It's a critical study that's going to complement the upper basin, and I just wanted to ask if y'all could take another look at this and take ownership over this study.
Sir, I'll start. This is a cost-shared study as we interpreted it. And talking to Colonel Murphy and his leadership down here, we did this twice successfully last year. It wasn't 7 states, but it was 4 on what is often a contentious river basin, on the lower Missouri River Basin, both on a navigation study that we stepped off on and a flood risk management study. But again, we have everyone at the table now, and that study is moving forward. And I think it's equally important on this particular study that we do the same.
Thank you, General. Another issue, cross-crediting, and I'm just going to combine 2 of them here in my last minute. There are 2 issues that I probably could go back, rewind films from previous hearings over the past 5 years and replay them over and over and over again. One of them, starting back in WRDA 2007 in Title VII, we did cross-crediting. We basically said all these projects in this basin, if you overpay on one, underpay on another, you can cross-credit because all of these projects are symbiotic. Language dates back to 2007. There were some perfections that were done to it in 2014, as I recall, and we still have been unable to actually utilize that provision of law dating back to 2007. Similarly, non-standard estates, this requirement by the Corps of Engineers that you have to buy land in fee title when you may have property owners that are willing to donate a project easement, thereby reducing the cost and expediting the ability of the project to move forward. Both of these provisions have been stalled through interpretive issues. I just want to ask y'all to please take a look at these, get these issues resolved. We need to stop talking about them and start turning dirt.
Absolutely, you have my commitment. These land issues are coming up even in my short tenure in a number of different areas. Definitely looking into that.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. Look, I just want to reiterate, these are mostly for ecological restoration projects. We have people willing to donate the project easement, and so it reduces costs and expedites timeframes. So I'd really appreciate that, and I want to thank you both for your efforts. Madam Chair, thank you, and yield back.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, I was muted. Mr. Graves, thank you very much. Mr. Bost, you're on, followed by Mr. Garamendi, and then Mr. LaMalfa.
Thank you,
Mr.
Madam.
Bost.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Secretary Connor, you know, in your testimony, you mentioned the importance of reliance quite a bit on that much of the water resources that the Corps works on are in need of upgrades and investment. In my district, the Jerry F. Costello Lock and Dam is part of the Upper Mississippi River 9-foot navigation project and plays a vital role in the economic competitiveness of the region. The area acts as a main thoroughfare for agriculture and manufactured goods to get to market. The local community estimates that additional 3 million tons of goods will be shipped on the Kaskaskia River over the next 5 years. The Lock and Dam will turn 50 years old in 2024. In anticipation of that, to prepare for the next 50 years, I would like to get a commitment from you that we're going to work to conduct a comprehensive review of the system to look at the potential for economic benefit to increasing the water levels from the 9-foot level to the 11-foot level. Can I get that commitment from you?
I'm happy to work with you on analyzing recognizing that that's not an issue that I'm familiar with. I will say really quickly, that was my first trip of getting out on the inland waterway system, spending some time on locks and dams. I absolutely recognize and agree with you the importance of the nation's supply chain, and particularly reliability of the system, maximizing its use has many benefits. I am happy to jump in and work with you on that particular issue, but let me do some homework.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And the next issue I want to ask you about is also something that needs to be brought to the attention, and that is the Alton Marina, which is northern part of my district along the Mississippi River. We've got a problem there that is just becoming too common. The area is leased by Alton for the Army Corps purposes to being a marina. But unfortunately, the Army Corps has conveyed to the local community that they will not allow the water levels to rise sufficiently for the area to be used as a marina. It has been used, and all of a sudden they've changed their process by which they're keeping the water levels. The Corps has stated that there is in concern of a minor flooding of the state IDNR land if the water levels are to rise. I believe that there's a need to be that there can be a reasonable solution to allow for navigation and recreation of this area, and I would like to see if you can commit to work with me on that problem as well.
Sir, this is General Spellman. I am not familiar with this one, but I will follow up right after this hearing to get into the details. Yes, sir, you have our commitment to work with you.
Yeah, that marina is vitally important for a stop-off midway between people traveling from the Gulf on into the Great Lakes area, and this is the importance of that marina. So at any rate, so commodities transported on the upper Mississippi River system come from a variety of industries throughout the entire system. Roughly 30% of the commodities needed to invest in our nation's infrastructure travel on the inland waterway systems. Secretary Connor, you are aware of a December letter to your office that we received that was sent and signed by more than 50 bipartisan members of both the House and the Senate, urging immediate construction start of Lock 25, not to mention countless other letters to support the year since then and since 2007. General Spellman, can you please explain to the committee the impact of putting Lock 25 in place and what we can see for the future for moving larger amounts of goods up and down the Mississippi River?
Yes, sir. I've been out to this project and several more on the system, and I acknowledge the importance of this particular suite of projects to transportation in your region. As you know, sir, we're in design. This is part of the navigation ecosystem program. We're in design for the improvements at Lock and Dam 25, as well as additional mooring cells and the accompanying ecosystem restoration that goes along with that particular set of projects. So I believe you know you're tracking. We need a new start authority to move forward with this, but we'll continue to do everything we can with the design dollars that you have given us, so that we're ready to move forward to construction as quickly as possible.
I appreciate that, and the people in our area appreciate that as well. We know the importance of moving those goods up and down the Mississippi River. There's another concern that I've got out there, but I've got a short time with that, and that is the fact that we still have the navigational problems that are occurring from a flood that blew out the levee or system down in the deep southern part of my district. But I'll talk to you about that later because my time has expired. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bose. Next, we have Mr. Garamendi, followed by Mr. Lamalfa, and then Mr. Melanowski. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question for Secretary Connor. President Biden's Executive Order 14005, ensuring the future is made in all of America by all of America's workers, directs all federal agencies to fully implement our nation's Buy America requirement for federally funded infrastructure projects. For civil works project carried out by the Corps, the Buy America Act clearly applies. However, it seems that projects carried out under the Corps section 1014 and sections 1043, these are the non-federal implementation authorities for which the non-federal sponsor acts as the contracting agent on behalf of the Corps. These apparently and inadvertently are loopholes to the Buy American Act. So this is a question, Secretary Connor, will the Army Corps commit to fully implementing the President's executive order to apply Buy America Act to projects carried out under these non-federal implementation authorities? And if you do not have the authorities, please clearly state so that we might correct this in the new WRDA. Secretary Connor.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Garamendi. Yes, absolutely. We are going to work and move forward consistent with the President's executive order. I'm not familiar with these two particular sections. Maybe General Spellman is, but I will certainly take a look at that in response to you raising the issue with me.
Sir, my understanding is a non-federal sponsor, whether under 1043 or a cost share agreement, has to follow all of the federal acquisition regulations. But we'll go back and double check that there's not a loophole here on these two authorities.
Please do, and thank you very much. We believe that this is not being implemented, and it certainly should be. And if you don't have the authority, well, then that's our job. Let's see, another question here to Secretary Connor. Will the Army Corps of Engineers, Secretary Connor, Congress has provided many federal agencies, including the Army Corps of Engineers, other transactional authority, OTA, to expand the government's access to innovative projects taking place in the private sector, overcoming some of the rigidity in the federal acquisition process. The Army Corps of Engineers has OTA, other transactional authority, for its military missions. And I thank General Spellman for the implementation of some of those projects in my district. However, the Corps has concluded it lacks the authority to use the OTA for its civil works missions. If that is the case, we must correct it. And so this goes to Secretary Connor and to Spellman. What is the situation and what is your view? And if it is not your authority, then we need to correct that.
Sir, this is General Spellman. I'll start. So the DoD authority that you're referring to, the other transactional authority, that allows us to carry out certain prototype projects, certain research projects, and certain production projects. And there are cases, as you mentioned, in our MILCON program where a project fits that category. I am not exactly sure of the application in the Civil Works program, but I would tell you we are absolutely open to this discussion and any tool that allows us to deliver more effectively. We would like to do more research and homework on this one, sir.
Then this is really for our committee. This is really an important thing. We use it extensively in the military construction projects for which we're responsible in the Armed Services Committee. And it really should apply for Civil Works also. Within the Sacramento River Basin, Secretary Connor and General Spellman, Congresswoman Matsui and I secured Section 209 of the 2020 WRDA to put in place the comprehensive study for the Yolo bypass in just west of Sacramento. That was designed not just for the bypass, but rather for the entire flood control system, giving the Corps the authority to look at the Sacramento River comprehensively rather than project by project, one-off systems that have been in place for a century. I bring this to your attention and I want to urge you to fully implement this in a comprehensive view of the Sacramento River flood control system. General Spellman, Secretary Connor, if you care to respond.
Sir, I'll start. We are absolutely open with the non-federal sponsor to these discussions on some of the policy changes that they're asking for. And sir, you mentioned it's all about comprehensive benefits. We want to do that. They're asking for some upfront exemptions to 3x3. We can absolutely do that. We're going to incorporate climate change. They're asking for that and a couple of others. So we're ready to step off on this. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. And once we have that new start authority and funding, we're ready to step out on this.
And I would just add, as you know, I'm
Very good. My final point.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just going to
Please
add
continue.
very quickly that, as you know, I'm very familiar with the Yolo bypass. I think a comprehensive look at all the benefits that can be associated with that traditional flood control element is the right way to go. So I share General Spellman's view that we should move forward as soon as we get the resources.
Very, very quick comment here. flood control districts in the Sacramento from the Yolo upstream through the Sutter are all looking at a comprehensive program to establish wetlands in those floodplains and in the rice fields for the benefit of salmon and the waterfowl population. It's a very comprehensive program. Some 300,000 acres would be involved in it. Probably the largest wetlands definitely the largest wetlands restoration project in the nation. I draw it to your attention. It's an extraordinary opportunity for the federal government and the local agencies to restore the habitat of the Sacramento River and do it in a way that maintains the economic activity in the area. With
Thank you,
that,
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gehrman. We will now have Mr. LaMalfa, followed by Mr. Molinowski, followed by Mr. Mask, and then Ms. Bordeaux. Mr. LaMalfa, you're on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. Thank you for this hearing today and the opportunity to speak with the Corps. And first, I want to commend the work with the Corps in our neighborhood that Mr. Garamendi and I have shared these years on several projects on the Feather River as well as on the Sacramento. The Hamilton City Levee project has essentially reached its culmination here. There's still some work to be done, but we've got flood protection there, as well as things are almost all buttoned up on the lower Feather River where it flows through Butte and Sutter and Yuba counties. And so anyway, we're very pleased to see that pretty much nearing its completion here. So with that, Secretary Connor, I want to move over to the WOTUS situation, the Waters of the United States, and the rules over that have changed time and again over recent years, and really thrown the rural communities and agricultural community into a big kind of a tizzy over which rule it's going to be as those sectors are affected by that. So Secretary Connor, in your confirmation hearings, you talked about the need for some type of clear and enduring definition. And I have a quote: "The rule has changed so many times over the years that I'm not sure the challenges are going to be any different. We need to have a clear definition of waters of the United States, that one that is protective as it should be under the Clean Water Act, but one that it provides clarity. I think you know the goal, from what I understand, in embarking upon our new rule is to," this is the really important line you said, "work very closely with the affected parties under that rule. So my goal would be to have a clear rule that has enough level of input that hopefully we can get out of this litigation cycle and we can move on with a rule that's going to be in place for a number of years. That should be the goal. That will do the most, I think, to help the Corps in its permitting ability and its responsibilities for making jurisdictional determinations if we have some clarity and we have some longevity to the next rule. That's going to require some collaboration, working with stakeholders, and I believe that's the game plan." Then the second part of the quote is, "Durability and longevity of a new rule will be a very high priority." I think those are good things you laid out in your confirmation. And certainly, as we're looking for clarity and not have the rules change again and again, as I think we've moved towards a pretty good balance these days in that, the affected parties have input, and we're having a situation where not every raindrop or every mud puddle is seemingly under the jurisdiction of the federal government. So please comment on that, as we've seen the 2020 rule that has been in place not that long, but certainly starting to work for rural areas. But touch on that, please, for me.
Absolutely. I appreciate you raising this, Congressman LaMalfa. And if anything, I'm even more committed to those words that I spoke during my confirmation hearing. We need a durable rule. We need to calm the waters, not to use a pun, but with respect to this, and provide the regulatory certainty that folks need who are the regulated community, and do so that is consistent with the protections envisioned by the Clean Water Act. And I think going back initially, and this is the game plan, as you know, going back initially to pre-2015 WOTUS, the rules and regulations that were in place then, as modified by agency guidance pursuant to Supreme Court decisions that came out in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, I think provides some structure and certainty now that people dealt with prior to the 2015 rule and then the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. So that's a good start, and then a very methodical second step rulemaking that's been proposed by the administration that engages deeply with affected communities, obviously preserving the agricultural exemptions are statutory, but also ensuring that we're doing the right protections and hopefully can withstand any litigation, which I hope doesn't come. That's the goal. And I've talked to my counterparts at the EPA, Administrator Regan, Assistant Administrator Fox. I think they are absolutely committed to that. That's most encouraging, and that's the reason that I'm even more fully committed to those words that you raised.
So how much change do you anticipate from the 2020 rule or the move in the direction away from pre-2015? How are we going to have clarity as we have it today, where again, those that are mostly affected are going to see some continuity instead of a whole new set of rules that might come within a year or so?
Well, I think, and I need to do more homework on this because, as you know, it's a very, very complicated from a legal standpoint, but we had Supreme Court decisions, we had regulations in place that implemented the responsibilities of the Clean Water Act. And then we had Supreme Court decisions that had some certain clarity. And then we had, terms that were incorporated about relatively permanent and significant nexus. And there was agency guidance moving forward with those directives from the Supreme Court that the regulated community and the environmental community seem to deal with. And that's the starting point, I think. And so people understand what that is. And that's what we're going back to now. As we move forward in a second round that's been talked about as far as the process, that's going to be the result of engagement, and how far and we go in getting into further details, I think, and interpreting those terms is something that we're going to have an in-depth dialogue about, which is what the administration is committed to.
Thank you, Mr. Lamalfa. We now will proceed to Mr. Malinowski, followed by Mr. Mass, Ms. Bordeaux, Mr. Westerman, Mr. Carvajal. Mr. Malinowski, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to our witnesses, Lieutenant General Spellman. It's good to see you again, Assistant Secretary Connor. Congratulations on your confirmation. I look forward to working with you as well. Lieutenant General Spellman, you and I have spoken several times, as you know, over the years about the Rahway River Flood Risk Management Study in New Jersey. I represent some of the towns in New Jersey that were hardest hit by Tropical Storm Ida, which claimed the lives of 30 people in my state and made clear once again the urgent need to protect the people, the homes, the businesses in and around the Rahway River watershed. You're a Jersey native. We've discussed in previous meetings this issue. I know that you're very familiar with this area. And while I'm very proud of the work that we've done with FEMA to deliver hundreds of millions of dollars in assistance to more than 80,000 households in New Jersey that were affected by the storm, I'm troubled that so much of our state remains vulnerable to the next inevitable big storm. Now, turning to WRDA, as you know, the 2020 bill nullified the Corps' termination of the Rahway study and ordered the Corps to identify and expedite an acceptable way forward. So the project should now be back on track. It's back with the Corps' New York district, where we think it belongs, and we're very grateful for that move. And in the guidance that the Corps issued back in August related to implementation of the Rahway provision in WRDA 2020, you acknowledged that you had the funds in place to proceed with the resumption of the study. So Lieutenant General Spellman, Assistant Secretary Connor, feel free to weigh in as well. Can you commit once again to work cooperatively with the local affected communities to bring about an acceptable solution, and to do so with the urgency that's required? As you know, it's not if, but when another devastating storm will hit this area.
Hey, sir, I'll start. This is General Spellman. We have $800,000 on hand for the federal portion, and we're ready to step out and move out on this study. And we're working with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. They're lining up their dollars, sir, for the non-federal portion of this, and with that, we'll sign a federal cost sharing agreement. We do get the urgency, sir, given what what IDA did to your district and that part of the region. And you have our commitment to work hard with the non-federal sponsors to get to an acceptable solution.
Thank you so much. And I know that getting to a solution requires all the stakeholders to be at the table and to be part of that solution, that our local governments also need to work with you to get to that spot. But I'm very grateful for your commitment. A question on a slightly different issue. Section 128 of WRDA 2020 created the harmful algal bloom demonstration program, and it directs the Corps to detect, prevent, treat, and eliminate harmful algal blooms. New Jersey is designated in the law as one of the focus areas for the program, which is, we think, very, very appropriate, because we have seen water bodies throughout New Jersey, including in the Lake Hopatcong and Bud Lake in my district, really badly affected by this phenomenon. So I wanted to ask you both if you can offer any status update on the Corps' implementation of that specific provision.
Sir, General Spellman, we received the Secretary's implementation guidance for this provision last night. We're excited. Again, this is opportunity. We have great work ongoing on this front in Florida on Lake Okeechobee. We have it in New York up on Lake Champlain, ongoing in Ohio on Lake Erie. Look forward to applying this work on the inland and coastal waters of New Jersey as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski. Thank you very much. Mr. Mast, followed by Ms. Bordeaux, Mr. Westerman, Mr. Carvajal. Mr. Mast, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you both for your testimony today. General, we're going to continue on Lake Okeechobee, continue on a debate, the conversation that we were having this summer, and hopefully get to a place that we can work on something in the next WRDA bill that can help both Lake Okeechobee and help the soldiers and civilians that are working for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I asked you a very pointed question last summer, General. Are the soldiers and civilians working at Port Mayaca directly on top of the toxic water pictured behind me, which is off-gassing and is toxic to a level sometimes 100 times greater than the threshold of toxic? Are those civilians and soldiers working directly on top of that, breathing it in 8-10 hours a day in insufferable conditions? Are they being poisoned? You answered to me emphatically no. Would you like to recant that statement or change it at all at this time?
Hey, Congressman Mass, I think what I told you is we're going to follow. I'm not a doctor, right? And I've shared that with you. I'm a civil engineer. So we're going to follow the best advice that we get from the community, the Florida Department of Health. I agree with you. I think it's deplorable that my civilians, my great civilians, my military folks have to work in these state conditions. But we're going to work harder when those conditions materialize at that Port Mayaca to clean it up, much like quicker with South Florida, just much like you did in a marina in your district.
In Pahokee, that's right. General, let's pause you there. This is important. You're not a doctor. You're the chief, the sworn-in chief of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, a lieutenant general, 3-star general, whose health and safety of all of those underneath you, that's your responsibility. The question isn't, are you doing what the Florida Department of Health says? The question is, on the table, are those soldiers and civilians being poisoned by that situation?
Sir, I would have to defer to a doctor to answer that question.
Well, you guys actually sent me a letter after last summer, and you said the EPA indicates the highest risk for microcystin exposure is through ingestion. That's kind of like a no shit statement, right? Obviously, if you drink something, it's worse than breathing it in or touching it, right? Could say the same thing about alpha radiation or asbestos or something else. So yeah, we can figure that one out. It also said a direct lie. The EPA indicates the health risks associated with inhalation are very low. That's not what the EPA said. In fact, I got a letter from the EPA saying that what you sent to me wasn't true. They said you got to take that in the right context. And here's their quote. The statement above that the health risks associated with inhalation are low, yeah, that's only in the proper context, comparing it to ingestion. They're not saying that the health risks are low. They're just saying it's lower than ingesting it. Like, again, like we could say about asbestos or radiation or anything else. I want to ask you a question. You're going off the Florida Department of Health. That's what you said last summer. That's what you just said just now. Why is the Department of Health telling you to have your people wear a mask and gloves if they're not being poisoned?
Sir, let me back up. First of all, I am not familiar with the letter that you received from the Environmental Protection Agency, and if your staff would like to share that with me, I would like to go back on the record and correct any
Done.
statements.
You'll get it. Done.
Right. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm sorry, sir. Can you repeat your other question? Why are my folks wearing masks?
No, listen, if the Florida Department of Health said, listen, you're following their guidance, wear a mask and gloves. You said you're following Florida Department of Health. Why do you have to wear a mask and gloves if you're not being poisoned?
Sir, I'm sure it has to do with precautions given the conditions that we're forced to work in your state.
Precautions for what? Don't play stupid. That's the definition of bureaucratic BS that goes on in this place. Again, you're a 3-star general, chief of the Corps, and your task is to protect your men and women, among many other things. Be protected from what? From being poisoned. Say it.
No, I'm not going to say that. Sir, I will look at the letters you've been given. I will confer with the doctors and the experts that you have in the state to protect our workforce.
Protect them from what? Why do they need to wear a mask and gloves if they're not being poisoned?
Sir, you've smelled the algae and you've read the reports. You've just quoted them yourself from the harmful effects that has to the people that have to live and work in these conditions.
No, I didn't tell you the effects of it at all. Why don't you tell us the effects of it?
Sure.
You're the chief of the Corps. These are your people. Tell us the effects that it's having on your soldiers and civilians.
Yes, sir. We work in these conditions, and as I mentioned to you last Friday, we're going to work harder to clean them up when these.
And what is it doing to your people? What is it doing to your people? Answer that question.
Sir, I'm not aware of
soldiers in uniform, like you, like me previously.
Mr. Mast, your time is up, Mr. Mast. Your time is up, sir. Please submit those questions in writing to the general, if you would.
Ask to submit for the
Bordeaux.
record, Chairwoman.
So ordered. Ms.
Thank you.
Bordeaux, followed by Mr. Westerman, Mr. Carvajal, Mr. Catco, Mr. Stanton. Ms. Bordeaux, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chairwoman Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser, for holding today's hearing. My district is home to the Water Tower, a nonprofit organization committed to creating an ecosystem of water innovation, which brings together the public and private sectors of the water industry, as well as academic and nonprofits to tackle challenges that the water industry faces. The Water Tower focuses on applied research, technology, innovation, workforce development, and community engagement to ensure access to safe, affordable, and resilient water services. General Spellman, in your written testimony, you talk about the Corps' continued need to invest in research and development, and was hoping you could elaborate a bit on that. What are the current R&D investments that the Corps has made, and what are priorities for future investments in water technology? General Spellman, can you all hear me?
Ma'am, sorry, I was on mute. Ma'am, when you look at the investment that the Corps is making in research and development, particularly in the Civil Works program, it is incredibly low. It's about 0.2% of our overall program. And if you compare that with DOD, that's investing 13%, or the Army investing 17%, Apple investing 4%. And the reason I am putting a priority on this is there are challenges, some of our nation's toughest challenges right now, where we don't have good construction solutions for. So it could be whether it's harmful algal blooms that we were just referring to, it could be drought, it could be wildfires or the effects of wildfires. I just think in order to get to good construction solutions, we need more investment in research and development. And I think we've been talking about some of them here. Forecast informed reservoir operations is a great example. I think we've got some great opportunities with harmful algal blooms in a variety of corners around the country. That's why I made this an emphasis area, ma'am.
Thank you, and I think that is wonderful. Do you currently, or do you anticipate partnering with nonprofit organizations and academic institutions as part of this R&D program?
Yes, ma'am. So the budget that we do receive comes to us in specific line items for very specific tasks. And you're right, we work with international partners, we work with academia, and we work with industry on all of those R&D projects and programs that we do have.
Okay. And I'm new here, so I'm learning how all this works. Do these partnerships need congressional authorization? How much do you need more flexibility in the types of projects that you all are looking at?
Ma'am, we don't need any authorizations for partnerships. Those are natural, and we have all of that. One of the things that I would like to get to is some more flexibility in our research and development program where we can follow some early successes. Today, I don't have the ability to move from one topic to another to reinforce success, but I would like to at least have conversations with the committee and the administration on some ways that we can go about doing that.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Connor. In October of 2021, the Army Corps released its Climate Action Plan as a part of the Biden administration's ongoing effort to tackle the climate crisis. And one of the 3 topic areas was listed as agency efforts to enhance climate literacy in its management workforce, which talked about the Corps training its people through working groups, interagency partnerships, and so forth. Could you talk a bit about climate literacy when addressing infrastructure and ecosystem resiliency? And just give us a little bit more detail. What does this actually mean that you would be implementing in terms of a curriculum for your workforce?
Thank you for that question. As I mentioned, resiliency is at the top of the order with respect to priorities. And so climate literacy, I think, is at every level of the organization. We need to have programs in place to identify risks to our different infrastructure, our different programs and activities. We need to highlight the innovative features that we can integrate with our projects to address resilience to new information, new data that describes the risk from climate change, and take those lessons learned and disseminate them throughout the organization. And then we have to incentivize our folks across the divisions and districts to look at climate resilience when they're formulating projects, et cetera. So we've got to educate ourselves at the top. We've got to assess the information that we can gather from the projects that we're already undertaking. And a lot of this we're doing with our partners at the local level who are demanding and wanting the Corps' involvement specifically to address those risks. And so they bring a lot of information to the table. It's a whole of government, and I just don't mean federal government. I mean with states and local entities to get that information disseminated through the organization. It's going to be an ongoing effort. It's not just a one and done training program. We want to sensitize folks to the need to look at it, and then it's going to be a continuing education program. That's the way I see it playing out. General Spellman?
That's right. I concur. That's right. I see it exactly that way. And I think there's just a pile on, there's plenty of opportunities here.
Okay. I look forward to having more of a conversation on this, but I recognize I'm out of time. So thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bordeaux. We now have Mr. Westerman, followed by Mr. Carvajal, Mr. Catco, Mr. Stanton, Ms. Gonzalez Colon. Mr. Westerman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It seems like it wasn't long ago that we were working on what I believe turned out to be a very good WRDA 2020, and I wish you and Ranking Member Rouser all the best in the committee as hopefully we work together and come up with another great bipartisan WRDA 2022 and keep the streak going. Mr. Connor, pardon me, Madam Chair. Oh, I miss you too. You'll have to come back and maybe we can do this in person sometime. Mr. Connor, General Spellman, thank you for your testimony today. And Mr. Connor, in your testimony, you mentioned briefly about the Corps and EPA working together on the WOTUS rule. And I know there was a notice put in the Federal Register back in November, and it only gave 60 days of comment time, and we've got all the holidays sandwiched in with that. I think as of Monday, there were only about 14 comments. And if we look back at the Obama administration MODIS rule, I believe it started with 90 days and was actually extended to 7 months. Is there any talk of extending the comment period since this is a much larger, more detailed rule, and I'm hearing a lot of people would like to have more time to comment on it?
There has been some discussion, so it will be taking under consideration the request for additional time. I would note, just continuing the discussion I had earlier, it's a two-step process. Step one is going back to pre-2015 definition of waters of the U.S. And so this step is fairly familiar to folks as far as what the goal is in defining waters of the U.S. and what the activity is here. Obviously, and I'll go back and check the statistic. I think I heard a little bit different with respect to the number of comments, but yeah, you may indeed be right. So I'm interested in informing myself. And then the second round is the much deeper dive into a potential, new rule, new from the standpoint of being promulgated from the ground up. So I hear you with I assume your question is actually a request also for us to give strong consideration. So I appreciate that and we'll take it under consideration.
Thank you. And it almost looks like the EPA may be driving the time frame more than the Corps on this one. General Spellman, I don't have a lot to ask you, but I do want to thank you for the work that you've done, and especially recognize some of your employees in my area or other members of the Corps. Colonel Noe has been great to work with. Unfortunately, he's only got about a year left there in the Little Rock district. And this is an issue that we talk about it a lot, but what establishes this 3-year term for colonels in the district commands? And has anybody ever looked at taking that out and allowing longer times or even shorter times if needed?
Sir, yes, sir. We have allowed for shorter times for our colonels because in many cases we need them to get them out to other assignments so that they can be joint qualified and of course competitive for service in more senior positions. So we haven't looked at extending beyond 3 years. We have a great pipeline of talented officers coming up through the ranks, and this is all part of their professional development. We keep our lieutenant colonels in for 2 and our colonels in for 3. As you know, they're commanding some of our larger and more complicated districts.
Thank you. I think that's something that needs to be looked at. One final question, concern I've had from some land surveyors, and this gets back to the TORN process on, I think, the way you actually award final contracts. And the question is just, has the Corps heard any complaints from contractors about the TORN process? And is there any discussion in the Corps about going back to the pre-March 2020 process? I know there was a letter in April of 2020, and I think from what I'm hearing, this is being implemented differently across different districts.
So I will take back the consistency that you mentioned. We are operating differently. We've worked extensively with industry on this particular matter. But if there are recommendations from other vendors out there, we would like to hear them.
Thank you, and Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Western. It's very kind of you. We have Mr. Carvajal next, followed by Mr. Carco, Mr. Stanton, Ms. Gonzalez Colon, Ms. Norton. Mr. Carvajal, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chairwoman Napolitano. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Connor and Lieutenant General Spellman for being here today and testifying. I represent the Central Coast of California, where we have already experienced the effects of climate change, including intense drought, increased flooding, and severe wildfires that have led to a deadly debris flow in my district. We currently have ongoing core projects that can help reduce these risks, better protect the environment, and of course, increase economic opportunity. Secretary Connor, the Lower Mission Creek Flood Control Project in my district began as a partnership between the County of Santa Barbara and the Corps in the late 60s. The county has spent millions of their own dollars, local taxpayer self-assessments, to complete a portion of this project. But they have been unable to receive the federal funds needed to complete this project due to a low benefit cost ratio. Federal funds have already been authorized to this project to complete a new general reevaluation report. Would the administration be supportive of transferring these funds to update the design cost, estimate, and economics of this project?
Let me provide a kind of initial response, particularly given the reference to the benefit cost aspect of this. I'm not familiar with the specifics of the project. I do know that the level of risk that you're experiencing in California from all the factors that you indicated are incredibly important, and we need to figure out a way to address that from communities, from the most affluent to the least affluent. And from that standpoint, the Corps is already moving forward in its project formulations and looking at comprehensive benefits that aren't just driven by a national economic determination that looks at strict benefit costs. We're looking at all the values and benefits that can be done. We've got moving forward from internal guidance to formal rulemaking. We have direction in WORDA 2020 to move forward with agency-specific procedures to implement principles and requirements and guidelines that will institutionalize the look at those benefits so that we can select projects based on different factors. So I'm sensitive to the issue you raised as far as the getting to your specific point, moving money and approving that for this particular project. I don't know if General Spellman has insights on that.
Sure, I'll just say Congress was generous in the 21 work plan, give us $500K to step off on the post-authorization change report. We're in the president's budget for 22 for another $600K that will allow us to advance that work. And then so we're having some conversations with our non-federal sponsor. To be frank, the NEPA on this project's about 22 years old, and we're confident we're going to have to go back and look at some of that. And we're having that conversation this week and next with our great partners out there.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate your attention to this important project in my district and finally moving it to a full completion. So thank you. Moving on to my next question, the Salinas Dam in San Luis Obispo County is currently owned by the Corps. It is my understanding that the Corps engineers have continued discussions and negotiations with the County of San Luis Obispo regarding the future of Salinas Dam, the associated reservoir, and other related infrastructure. It is also my understanding the questions and issues involved in this process are complex and will require significant additional discussions between the Corps of Engineers and San Luis Obispo County. Lieutenant General Spellman, until the county and the Corps have come to an agreement to transfer ownership, can the Corps refrain from taking actions that would adversely jeopardize the county taking ownership? And what I mean by this is such as taking administrative steps associated with the General Services Administration, stepping into the shoes of the Corps as the federal agency responsible for disposing of this facility.
Sir, this is General Spellman. So I will go back and examine my authorities to do a direct transfer to the county from the Corps outside of the process that's outlined in law, where I have to work through the General Services Administration. Let me do some homework on that. My only goal here is I want to transfer a project with eyes wide open. I mean, the Army put this project up in 6 months, as you mentioned, back in 1942. It came to us a few years later. I just want to make sure we're clear with the county on any seismic concerns, any structural concerns, or dam safety concerns, and we hand off in a complete transparent manner. But sir, I'll do more homework and we'll follow up with your team.
Thank you very much. I'm out of time. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carvajal. Mr. Ketko, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to see you again, as always. And I'm glad to be here with everybody on the committee. I would also like to thank Chairman Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser for holding today's hearing on the upcoming Water Resources Development Act of 2022. And I look forward to working with you both in the coming months as we develop this legislation. The 2020 WRDA bill was a prime example of bipartisan cooperation. And I hope that that will be the case this year as well. This legislation is especially important for the community that I represent in Central New York, where we understand the importance of reliable investments in water infrastructure all too well. Specifically, our coastal communities on Lake Ontario have faced a number of challenges with sustained high water levels, historic flooding, and deferred maintenance resulting in significant damage to our aging harbor and shoreline water infrastructure. Unfortunately, despite the diligent work and sincere partnership of our local representatives from the Army Corps of Engineers, Buffalo District, the significant backlog of maintenance in my district has been underfunded in the Corps' work plan in recent years. For communities in Oswego, Fairhaven, and Sodus Bay, the timely completion of Army Corps projects can have a major impact on the local community and economy. This is one of the reasons I was proud to support the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which I think is critically important and which provided significant supplemental funding for Army Corps. I look forward to working with my colleagues on this committee to ensure those resources are effectively mobilized to our communities in the months ahead. For Mr. Connor, I got a quick question, actually, for Mr. Connor. Where did 2020 include a language to advance the Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study? This project is not only essential to my district, but to thousands of communities along all of the Great Lakes. I also appreciate that this project was identified in the president's budget, and I was proud to join my colleagues in supporting this budget request through the appropriations process. Looking to WRDA 2022, the question I have is, are there any additional federal authorities that the Corps of Engineers would like to see in order to help advance the Great Lakes Coastal Resiliency Study?
The short answer is I'm not aware of any new authorities that we need right now with respect to the coastal resilience study. But I would just say that I think I absolutely agree with you. That is an incredibly important study given the dynamics going on with respect to the Great Lakes, necessary across the entire region. In my first trip inland waterways, I did take some time to spend with our Chicago district and get briefed on the scope of the Great Lakes Coastal Resilience Study. We will keep in touch with you with respect to anything the study yields with respect to needs moving forward, but it's a high priority to move forward and get that study up and going with all the non-federal partners.
Yeah, thank you. And as you well know, anybody who knows anything about the Great Lakes knows that the high water levels in Superior and Huron and all those others end up finding a way towards Lake Ontario. They kind of all funnel their way there. So the water levels, are at record highs along those waterways. We can just anticipate them coming our way as well. So working with the International Joint Commission is really important as well. But we have a pressing issue that Lieutenant General Spellman I'd like to talk to you about, and that's in Fairhaven. And I've spoken to you and others about this in the past about the lack of prioritization for recreational areas as far as Corps of Engineer projects. And in Fairhaven, we have a major problem with one of the walls that's collapsing. And they did something to try and stem the problem a little bit. The Corps did a couple of years ago, but they also realized they need to rebuild that wall and fix it the right way. And from what I've heard, the locals are saying it's collapsed. I don't know if it has or not, but it sounds like it's really in bad shape. And I just want to make sure that the Army Corps locally in Buffalo area understands the importance of that wall not collapse. That wall collapsed, that bay is in real trouble, and that bay, it's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars at a minimum of damage. So I just hope you give it the priority it needs, and tell us what you need if you're not getting everything you need from us.
Sir, this is General Spellman. I will follow up on the wall collapse, and our team will get back with your staff and any needs that we have.
I'd appreciate it sooner rather than later, because this is with the ice and everything and the water levels where they are now. It's been something I hope we can get addressed this year. We've been trying to get the Corps to do it the last couple of years, and I know you have a tremendous backlog, and that backlog is a concern. And I'm worried about some of the bureaucracy that comes along with those backlogs. But I just hope you can push through it and try and get this thing done.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Katko, very much. The next will be Mr. Stanton, followed by Gonzalez Colon, followed by Ms. Norton, then Mr. Guest. Mr. Stanton, you're on.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for holding this important hearing, and to Assistant Secretary Connor and General Spellman. It's good to see both of you again. General Spellman, you were last before this committee in June, and at that time I submitted a series of questions on the Rio de Flag project in Flagstaff, Arizona. Unfortunately, nearly 7 months later, we have not yet received a response on this, on our questions. This is an incredibly important flood control project in my state. So obviously there's frustration with the lack of response to our query. I expect the Corps to respond to me and all the other members of this committee in a timely manner. I just want to stop right here and give you an opportunity to respond.
Sir, I will go track down your letter as soon as we adjourn here, and we will get your response as soon as possible. I apologize.
I appreciate that greatly. It is important that when members of Congress do provide queries, particularly after hearings, that we get immediate or timely responses. Assistant Secretary Connor, I did appreciate our conversation last month, and one important issue that we discussed was the importance of federal investment in environmental infrastructure to help small, rural, and tribal communities address their aging water and wastewater systems. My top priority is to ensure that the authority I secured for Arizona in the 2020 WRDA receives federal investment it needs so that communities can tackle their water infrastructure challenges. I appreciate the Corps allocating funds in fiscal year 21 work plan to advance the first project under the authority, a very important waterline project for the Pasquayaqui tribe. Great progress is being made on this progress that will bring non-potable water to the reservation so the tribe can conserve its precious and limited potable water. To date, more than a dozen communities in the Yavapai Apache Nation have expressed interest in this program, outlining more than $70 million in needed water and wastewater projects. So I look forward to working closely with you to ensure federal funds are allocated to advance these critically important projects. And although Arizona is a desert state, it is no stranger to flooding, and there are several projects that need the Corps support. The Tres Rios ecosystem restoration to help ensure the Salt and Gila River corridors, feasibility studies for the Cave Buttes Dam and Agua Fria Wash to address dam safety and strengthen flood protection for more than 1 million residents in Maricopa County, and the Little Colorado at Winslow Flood Control Project, where nearly a quarter of residents live in poverty, and critical services, including the hospital, assisted living center, emergency services, and schools, are directly in the 100-year floodplain. The bipartisan infrastructure law provides the Corps with substantial resources for investigations, construction, and environmental infrastructure. And it's my expectation that Arizona, which hasn't done too well in previous work plans, will finally see some significant movement and support on these long-awaited and important projects. In the time I have remaining, I would just open it up for any comments from you or General Spellman on these critically important Arizona projects.
So I'll start very quickly and leave time for General Spellman. As per our conversation, I enjoyed that. Obviously, I understand the risk to Arizona from a water supply perspective, given your location in the Colorado River Basin and all that entails. So I was impressed at the need and the use that you've identified for the environmental infrastructure activities. And it's great to have Arizona added to the 595 program. I was amazed at when your staff set over the list, how much there's pent up demand for the use of that EI program in Arizona. And it just is a result of the risk that's involved in water supplies. I would just say, I think there's a lot of good work here in Arizona teed up to get multiple benefits. You are prone to floods. That has, we need to be looking at that with an eye towards water supply to address the wholesale risk. So look forward to working with you and your team.
Sir, I'll just quickly add on EI, we have 39 projects in the queue, as you said, just over $70 billion. We'll make our best technical argument if we're offered a 22 work plan to advance those projects. So real quick on Tres Rios, last time I told you we had some perception problems with this project. We have aligned with both the Gila Indian community and the city on a way forward, and we're working to report a capability of 1.8 million next year, so we can advance that packer and get back to work out there. Making a lot of good progress with the commanders in the field with the Federal Rail Administration and some of the challenges we've had there where our civil works projects intersect with railways. I'm happy to report progress there. And then, sir, we received the Secretary's guidance on, you remember Section 162, leveraging federal infrastructure for increased water supply. And I just think, as the Secretary just said, there are many opportunities in the state of Arizona where we can put that authority to work.
General, Assistant Secretary, thank you very much for your good work now, and look forward to working closely with you to advance these critically important projects in the future. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton, very much. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon, followed by Ms. Norton, Mr. Guest, Mr. Lowenthal. Ms. Gonzalez-Colon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing. I want to thank Assistant Secretary Connor and General Spellman for their presentation today and for the work they do for the Corps of Engineers in our nation. I will say that the Corps is one of the best resources I have counted on for Puerto Rico. The Jacksonville district, with support of many others, has always given us their utmost support, and I want to congratulate them for that and for all the hard work. In the past few years, in the face of disasters, unprecedented levels of funding were approved, and I'm happy to be working to that end. That enabled addressing projects that has been pending for decades, like Rio Puerto Nuevo and Rio La Plata, and immediate needs like the Port of Arecibo and Mayagüez and the coastal communities of Loíza. But there are still pending major priority projects that have completed feasibility studies and favorable chief reports. This includes three critical projects that I was closely following with your predecessors. First is the ecosystem restoration of Caño Martín Peña, which is not just a matter of ecological balance, but of security of infrastructure and justice for communities. The second one is the San Juan Harbor navigation channels that is strategically essential for keeping the major port for supplies of food, fuel, and industrial supplies in Puerto Rico, and the Guayanilla Flood Protection Project that will enable the protection of an entire town that has been impacted severely by multiple natural disasters. These and many other projects in towns across the islands like Yauco, Ponce, Yaucoa, Bonito, Gurabo, just to mention a few, require prompt attention. And it's my hope that we can soon hear good news about them. And I look forward to receiving you in Puerto Rico for that purpose. Now, I do have a couple of questions. I want to just make the first of them. Secretary Connor, in your testimony, you mentioned a proposed rule that will implement a new federal credit program to support investment in safety projects to maintain, upgrade, and repair non-federal dams. And this is a matter of great interest, and I will be very willing to support it. I do understand that you expect this to be approved and put in effect shortly, and what we can do to make it so.
Yes, thank you for the question. In regards to the WIFIA program, Water Innovation Finance and Infrastructure Act authority that we have, and it's been proposed, we're authorized for a broader set of activities, but the 2021 appropriations bill specifically, NIJ, I believe, gives resources to move forward with the dam safety aspect for non-federal dams. So we need to move forward with a rulemaking. We are working within the administration through the interagency process to come out with a proposed rulemaking here in the near future. And so that'll start a public process. We'll take input and we'll move forward and hopefully be able to finalize that sometime midway or late fall this year with respect to getting that program in place and making use of those resources. And I'll just say, I think it's an incredible part of a resilient strategy that we work with non-federal partners. The vast majority of dams throughout the country are non-federal dams. This is an important tool as part of an overall resiliency agenda.
Sir, I earlier mentioned some of my top priorities in Puerto Rico, like the Caño Martín Peña ecosystem restoration project. And I do know that it's waiting for a new start with local sponsor ready to go. In recent years, we have repeatedly had an increased ecosystem new starts included in authorizations and applications, but somehow it never makes the cut. With the new emphasis on justice for impacted communities, do you expect there to be more than the norm under the infrastructure plans and the new WARDA?
Absolutely. I mean, as I discussed earlier, and I think, you know, it applies to the project that you referenced, Caño Martín Peña. We need to look at the comprehensive benefits, the communities that will be benefited by the activity that's being proposed. That is definitely a screen that we are bringing to the process of evaluating projects for funding in these various work plans, whether it be what we're looking at in 22, IIJA, any flexibility that we have. So rest assured that we're not just talking about priorities, we're trying to implement them in the decisions that we're making now as we move forward.
Question, in deciding the use of infrastructure funding, will there any preference to projects that are show already and where the non-federal partners have taken an initiative in moving their part forward?
Well, we certainly want to look at, as part of the mix, the priorities of resilience, environmental justice, supply chain issues, but those are laid on top of existing priorities that the Corps has for life safety, completing projects, activity that's already in the works. So we're kind of looking through all of these historical factors, new priorities, and making our decisions and moving forward.
Your time is up, Ms. Colon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ms. Norton, followed by Mr. Guest, Mr. Lowenthal, Mr. Weber, Mr. Coyne, and Ms. Wilson. Ms. Norton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for this really important hearing. My question is for both of our witnesses, Assistant Secretary Connor and Lieutenant General Spellman. I plan to submit to the new Word Bill 3 separate requests for projects that affect the District of Columbia, which of course is my district. And I'd like the administration's views on each of them. One, to tap new funding sources for the Washington Aqueduct, which produces drinking water for approximately 1 million people living and working and visiting the district and Virginia, and includes, of course, the Capitol and federal buildings. Secondly, to address the region's vulnerability to water supply loss by identifying alternative water sources for the customers of the aqueduct. And my third ask in the Word Bill will be to address the flooding on the National Mall, which has suffered severe and costly floods that have forced government facilities to close down. So first, let's take tapping new funding sources for the Washington Aqueduct, which produces the drinking water for this entire region. What is the administration's view on that project?
Ma'am, this is General Spellman. I'll start. As you know, the aqueduct and our team there, we do not receive any federal funding, right? Our operations are funded by water rates that are paid by local taxpayers. And ma'am, you've been out there, and I think the team does a miraculous job. But it is, you're exactly right. Your assessment is exactly right. We could use some additional funding. Other funding sources would be greatly helpful to us to maintain what we have, but also to monitor.
So you have only payer sources now?
Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see if we can get another source, because the necessity is clear. And secondly, to address the region's vulnerability to water supply loss by identifying alternative water sources for the customers of the aqueduct. What is your view on that?
And the current aqueduct provides the city and Northern Virginia and portions of Maryland only 1 to 2 days of supply of water. That's risky. We've done some high-level work where we think we've identified other real estate that could supply the region upwards of 20 to 30 days of supply. But that's an extensive feasibility effort that we would have to undertake first, followed by, obviously, by construction to put all of the infrastructure in place.
Is the feasibility effort underway?
No, ma'am. We would need an authority, a feasibility study authority to move out on that effort, and of course, funding to bring all the right technical folks.
God, you don't even have the authority to do the feasibility study. Well, I'll make sure you get it.
That's correct.
And staff is with me, so they hear me saying that. And third, to address the flooding on the National Mall, which, as you may know, has suffered severe and costly floods that have even forced the government several government facilities close by to close down. How do you expect to address that?
I know we've provided your staff some legal drafting services on how we might go about this. This is at the confluence of multiple federal agencies, and there's really no one lead federal agency, something that we would want to obviously designate to move forward on any effort like this. Our Baltimore district is using some authorities that we have under our floodplain management services to look at previous events that may help inform some mitigation in the interim before we get the authority and actual guidance to move forward. This one's a bit complicated, but it can be done.
You are moving to get the multiple authority from, I mean, do you need any help from the Congress?
Ma'am, I think we would look to the Congress to appoint a lead federal agency to step off on the effort to work with all of the other federal agencies that are impacted by this.
That's an important recommendation, and I will see to it that that is done either through legislation or administrative or through administration. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This has been very helpful to me.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. We follow Mr. Guest. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. To both of our witnesses, I want to thank you for taking time to be with us today as we discuss WRDA 2022 and we begin to look at what that legislation is going to look like going forward. I want to talk and direct this question to you, General Spellman. In your written testimony, you make a statement to which I strongly agree. On page 4, you state that in order, that I feel strongly that in order to achieve our vision, we will need to continue to invest in our research and development program. We are working to further our R&D initiatives and strengthen our partnership with academic institutions to benefit from the enormous capacity of our nation's scientists. So we will know how best to meet the challenges of the 21st century. Investment in research and development helps us find solutions for today's and tomorrow's challenges. And so as we talk about research and development, I want to talk about the Army Corps of Engineers Research and Development Centers, ERDIC. We know that that is an important part of the research and development that occurs there at the Army Corps of Engineers. There are actually 4 ERDIC centers that are spread across the country, one in Alexandria, Virginia, one in Hanover, New Hampshire, one in Champaign, Illinois, and one in my home state of Vicksburg, Mississippi. And I've had a chance to visit the facility there in Vicksburg and see firsthand some of the amazing things that they are doing. And so, General, I would ask first if you can kind of give the rest of the committee a brief overview of ERDIC and their mission and talk about the important role that ERDIC plays in the Army Corps of Engineers.
Yes, sir. I would say ERDIC, incredibly group of talented folks that we have that enable us across all of our mission areas, not only civil works, but the work we do in the military construction, the work that we're doing for the combatant commanders out in the field, in deployed locations as well. Sort of the comment in my testimony was really geared toward the civil works program, and in that we are investing, I believe it's 0.2 of 1% in research and development. And I shared with others that there are many challenges across the country today where we don't have a construction solution for. And I use examples like drought and harmful algal blooms and others where a small investment, I believe, in research and development on some of these really thorny issues will help us immensely inform the way ahead in the future.
In general, I want to talk a little bit about funding, particularly of civil works. We know that the civil works does not have an individual research, development, and test evaluation account, an RDT&E account, but instead relies on funding through various civil works account to sustain its research. And so my question is that Congress, as we are continuing to emphasize improving and repairing our aging infrastructure, as we look to the new challenges, some of the challenges that you've referred to, what are some of the advantages of consolidating research funding into a dedicated RD&E account?
So I think it would give our senior research scientists flexibility to pursue success. So today, for example, if we have a success in a harmful algal bloom demonstration, say down in Florida, we can follow that success until that line item runs out, right? If I had a more centralized account, it would enable the team to pursue that even further without having to wait for another budget cycle.
And so if you had a dedicated account, could we create that consistency of funding? Is that what you're saying, General?
Yeah, yes, sir. And of course, it would have to come with some ground rules on my ability to reprogram, but certainly under the oversight of the secretary and the administration. But I just think having that tool would help us move faster on some of these really thorny issues that the nation is wrestling with.
And General, as it relates to increased transparency, if this funding again was in a dedicated RD T&E account, what effect would that have on transparency?
Sir, I would be open to any reporting requirement to the secretary, to Congress. We would obviously our books would be wide open, but I would be completely transparent in our management of this particular account were it to come through to fruition.
And General, wouldn't you agree that if all this money were to flow through a single account, that it would make tracking the spending of these dollars much easier than now, where this money is flowing through various civil works accounts?
Yeah, yes, sir, that's correct.
Well, General, thank you, and I'm out of time, so at this time, I will yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Guest, very much. Mr. Lowenthal, followed by Mr. Weber, Mr. Cohen, Ms. Wilson. Mr. Lowenthal, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, General Spellman and Secretary Connor, for this very, very important hearing this morning. Yesterday, I had the good fortune of spending the day at the ports of LA and Long Beach with Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg, Secretary Pete, and state officials, federal officials, local elected officials, labor, trucking, interests, rail, everyone who's involved in the supply chain and the congestion at the ports. And what's happened the last couple of months is the entire nation has watched every night on the news the concerns about congestion at the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles and other ports also, and how whether they were going to be able to get goods for the holiday season on them, and to be able to have access to goods this year. So we all met with the secretary to kind of access where we are and how the ports can act more efficiently and what they can do. And it was a very productive meeting because in many ways, although we have huge congestion problems, we dodged a bullet this year. Everybody working together, federal resources, state, labor coming together, expanding hours of operation. The ports were able to operate in a more efficient way, which is very positive, but there's much more to go. And we were all thankful, but the question is, how are we going to ensure that the ports work in an efficient way? And the Army Corps of Engineers has a critical role in this. General Spellman, my first question is, as you know, in October of this year, you signed a critical report which recommended significant navigation improvements at the Port of Long Beach, which is the port that I represent. Currently, large container vessels are unable to access the port's West Basin or Pier J Basin unless they travel only at high tide or do not have top cargo capacity. Easing this bottleneck is one of the solutions to faster operations, less idling, and lower emissions. Can you provide some additional background for the committee on this critical project and its benefits?
Sir, I had the opportunity to visit the Port of Long Beach in 2019, and the Port Authority and our team out there took me through this extensively, and it's exactly as you have described. So I think next steps here, you mentioned the Chief's report. That's up for Congress's consideration here in WRDA 22, and we're hopeful for that authorization. If we're offered a 22 work plan, sir, I'm going to seek about $1.5 million because we want to get moving on preliminary engineering and design And we've got to do some sediment sampling so we can get ready for to move to construction.
Thank you, General. I want to follow up, Secretary Connor, on an issue that had been raised originally by Chairman DeFazio, and that's about the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund resources. You know, WRDA 2020 allowed donor ports like the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles to use their harbor maintenance trust funds for expanded uses such as dredging of channels, in-water infrastructure improvements, berth maintenance, building seismic resiliency. You too have seen this, what has taken place at the ports and the impact upon our supply chain the last few months. And if we don't invest in these critical hubs, the entire nation feels the consequences. Can you touch on what you're doing to make sure that the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund resources are invested as effectively as possible?
I'm going to have to get General Spellman's help on this somewhat, but as I mentioned in my response to the chairman, obviously this new approach with respect to incentivizing the use and taking it off budget, a certain portion of the trust fund is a critical element. So our job is to be ready to expend those funds. What I've learned in my tenure here so far, $17.1 billion, there's a lot of need out there, more need than even those resources. And I'm talking about the IIJ resources. So the trust fund is an absolute critical part. I have no doubt that we can make use of those funds. It's an important part of the tools that we have as far as the details for making sure we're implementing as quickly as possible.
Yes, sir. I would just add that the work that you have done in Congress is forcing that end of year surplus to come down. We expect it to be $8.5 billion at the end of this year. That's a lot, but it's much lower than what it has been in previously. And that just means we're putting more money to work out in these ports and in these federal navigation channels. As I mentioned, industry is ready to go with new vessels coming online, and certainly the fleet that we have out there, even our own core fleet. They're excited to get after this work and for the opportunities that you've given us here.
Just as I have to yield back as my time is up, I just want to remind you that I am also talking about the fact that the changes in the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund was also, besides increasing revenues in the fund that Army Corps can access, it also really looked at the different relationship between donor ports and all the receiving ports. And my ports are donor ports. We like being donor ports, but we wanted additional flexibility, and that's really what I was asking for. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal, for your testimony. We have Mr. Weber, Mr. Cohen, and Ms. Wilson. Mr. Weber, you're recognized. Mr. Weber? We'll go on to Ms. Cohen. Mr. Cohen, you're recognized. You got to unmute, sir.
Unmute. All right, we've gotten to unmute, so we're doing pretty good. Thank you. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity for this committee and hearing, and I just wanted to make some remarks concerning our hopes for the bill. Firstly, in Shelby County in Memphis, the Wolf River is an important river downtown. In years past, it's been predominantly industrial. It's our hope that it will become and has become more residential and more, not residential, but more recreational. There will be an effort, and we hope that you will work with us on this, of course, to dam up the Wolf River downtown to create a lake that will be for boating and for fishing and for swimming. And on the east side, it'll be developed some, and it'll give Memphis another attraction for people downtown where we have a large recreational and tourist priorities. So that's one of the issues that will come up, and we know we've had input from the Army Corps Memphis office. Feel, as I recall, confident they want to work with us on that, and I look forward to working with the chairwoman and my fellow committee members to pursue this, which would require a deauthorization of part of the river to make the proposed lake a reality. This will be something that is really forward thinking and the kind of thinking that's making Memphis a great tourist town and an amenity for people to live downtown where they didn't in the past, but they have for the last couple of decades and becoming more and more residential. So that's one thing I wanted to raise was this Wolf River situation. Now I'd like to ask Lieutenant General Scott Spellman a question, if you don't mind. The last WRDA cycle was a productive one for inland waterways in many ways. The committee successfully made changes to the cost share for new construction projects, increasing the Corps' ability to reduce the backlog capital investment projects. The benefits of the change in cost share for new construction projects were realized in 2018 when Olmsted Lock was completed 4 years ahead of schedule and more than $330 million under budget. General Spellman, do you believe this level of efficiency can be achieved with the funds provided in the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act and full funding from receipts deposited into the Inland Waterways Trust Fund for all the projects contained in that 2020 capital investment strategy?
Sir, I do. I think it's going to allow us to put more federal dollars to work sooner and to get after some of this much needed maintenance in your district and frankly across the country.
Thank you, sir. What are the most efficient cost and construction timelines identified?
I'm sorry, sir, could you repeat the question?
What are the most efficient cost and construction timelines that have been identified?
The most efficient?
Yes, sir. Cost and construction timelines.
Sir, are you referring to a specific project?
Yeah, I guess.
So I could follow up with your team on the project that you have in mind.
All right, I'll have Ms. Schnelly contact you about that. We've talked to some folks about it, and it's a particular lock that we think will be important to the program. Assistant Secretary Connor, I was proud to join with Chairman DeFazio in urging the administration to reopen and re-examine the nationwide permits and take into consideration their climate change and environmental justice impacts. While the Trump administration significantly broadened several of the nationwide permits applications, the proposed Byhalia pipeline, which has been withdrawn, fortunately, that was in my district and a little bit in Mississippi in Trent Kelly's district, displayed what can happen if they aren't nearly used as Congress intended. Assistant Secretary Connor, my question is, my understanding the Army Corps of Engineers recently reissued 40 nationwide permits and 1 new nationwide permit. Can you describe what kind of stakeholder input and public engagement the Corps considered before reissuing these permits, and to what extent environmental justice and climate change impacts were considered?
Yes, thank you, Congressman Cohen. The process that is involved with respect to the nationwide permits is one that involves an environmental review under NEPA. That is part of the overall, so there's engagement there, but it's a broad swath of activities that are moved forward with those 40 plus 1, as you identified. Nationwide permits are good for 5 years, so they're not, we have to undergo that process and that public engagement and our environmental review processes every 5 years. But to your point, I think there are issues. There's a lot of good with respect to these nationwide permits. They incentivize the protection of waters of the U.S. And by providing clear parameters of how you can be within the nationwide permit, so folks who are needing permits can undertake protective measures to try and fall within those categories, and we reduce the impact. So that's the good thing. Having said that, there are concerns about the situation you particularly mentioned, Byhalia, of how do we engage the public on activities within those nationwide permits. We're going to take a look at that, even as I tout nationwide permits because of the certainty that they provide and the protections that they provide. We do need to take a look at some of these activities, even though it does go through the public review process every 5 years. So I'm sensitive to the concern that I think you have given your experience with the situation, and we'll be taking a look at that.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Connor. The nationwide permit process, in my opinion, is never meant to be applied to large projects that have far-reaching cumulative impacts. So I appreciate working with you in the future, and I think my time has expired, and I thank the chairwoman for her graciousness in permitting me to go beyond my time and in my attire.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. You're very
You're
welcome.
welcome. Go Dodgers.
Ms. Wilson, you're next.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. And Mr. Connor, thank you so much for your testimony. As the administration prepares to release its funding priorities for the infrastructure bill later this week, I'm hopeful for robust Everglades restoration funding given its alignment with the administration's goals. This is a turnkey program that is historically and still is today a strong bipartisan issue among the Florida delegation, and I'm chair of the Florida Ports Caucus. As a vocal champion for the Everglades, it is very imperative for me that these projects are completed for the benefit of Florida and the nation. Mr. Connor, please share whether you expect the necessary administrative steps to be completed for this committee to consider action on project components for the Western Everglades Restoration Project, the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project, and the Indian River Lagoon South for WRDA 2022.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I would just say really quickly, I was in Florida this past weekend. I spoke at the Everglades Coalition Conference. I am familiar from my previous tenure at the Department of Interior with the restoration program, but the enormity of it and the Corps' involvement and the integration with the local communities and the local sponsors was very impressive to me. So it re-energized the interest and the need to move forward. With respect to your specific question, Western Everglades, I think we're on track to re-engage with the partners to move forward with the study. I don't know that there are going to be results in time for WRDA 2022 because of the temporary delay in reworking with the project sponsors and moving forward, including the Miccosukee tribe and Seminole tribes. And I know there's strong interest. We're going to move that process forward. I'm not certain that it's going to have results that will be ready for WRDA 2022. On the other two studies, Indian Lagoon and Lake Okeechobee, I would defer.
Yes, ma'am. Just very quick on Indian River Lagoon. I think you know that we're in the president's budget for $17 million. And what that's going to allow us to do is continue the operational testing and monitoring of the C-44 reservoir, which we're filling right now, and looking forward to continuing construction of both of the stormwater treatment areas, C-23 and C-24. And ma'am, if you could remind me of your other project that you mentioned.
The Indian River Lagoon South?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. That's the one I just mentioned that we're in the budget.
The Okeechobee Watershed.
The watershed restoration program. Yes, ma'am. So we're working through a number of tribal concerns, a number of concerns with South Florida Water Management District. And then I personally have a number of technical concerns on these aquifer storage recharge wells. I want to make sure that we've incorporated an appropriate amount of adaptive monitoring and research and development before we go out and just execute 55 wells in this program. But I'm fairly confident we'll have this ready in time for WRDA 22.
Okay, thank you. That's reassuring. Currently, Miami-Dade County is awaiting a decision on its locally preferred plan for the Miami-Dade Black Bay Coastal Storm Risk Management Feasibility Study. As you are aware, this study began in October 2018 in response to Hurricane Irma to identify ways to reduce damage from future storms. Approval of the waivers will allow the development of a locally preferred plan to ensure that local concerns on the environment, economy, and distressed neighborhoods are included in any final plan. What is the status of this decision and anticipated timing? Also, please share any information you have on the agent's position on the county's request.
Yes, ma'am. This is General Spellman. I'll start. So our non-federal sponsor came back to us. To be frank, it was looking for much more investment in natural and nature-based features in this plan. And we are completely supportive of that effort. And the non-federal sponsor is going back now and going to come back to us with the technical piece of that. And we look forward to seeing the results of that good work. I think natural nature-based features can be an important part of the eventual solution here for Miami. However, I don't think we are going to see the level of protection that we would like to give the city, given climate change, given sea level rise, and the severity of storms that you experience down in South Florida. I believe In addition to natural nature-based features, there's going to be a concrete, steel, and compacted dirt component to this project as well to provide adequate protection.
Okay, thank you. This is for both Mr. Connor and Mr. Spellman. I'm just north of Miami is Port Everglades, and the port has worked
Your
with
time
the
is
Port
up.
Conditioning and
Ms. Wilson? Your
Yeah.
time is up. If you would submit those questions to the gentleman, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will submit this question about Port Everglades, and I hope to get your commitment to increase this project's authorization in the upcoming WRDA project.
Thank you very much, Ms.
Thank
Wilson.
you. I yield
Mr.
back.
Weber, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. And I'm glad to be here. And I want to say congratulations to Secretary Connor and General Spellman. We're glad to see you again. Thank you both for being here. I actually have kind of a comment to start with. A note of thanks to both of y'all for mentioning in the chief's report for the coastal protection and restoration along the Texas Gulf Coast. Y'all may or may not know, my district is the 4 coastal counties now that we have Orange County coming up, and with redistricting Orange County, Jefferson County, Galveston County, the southern half of Missouri County. And so for us, the coastal spine, the Ike Dike, if you want to call it that, coastal barrier protection is extremely important. And I would also argue extremely important to the energy industry, because if we get a major hurricane direct hit up the Houston Ship Channel, and not just the Houston Ship Channel, anywhere along the area, we would severely hamper Texas's energy output and therefore the nation's. And it could even be a very big, large environmental disaster should we rupture an oil tank and dump that into the bay. So thank you for that. Gentlemen, y'all might be aware of a high priority for me in the 14th District of Texas, which is long overdue completion of the Galveston Harbor Channel. For arcane unknown reasons, whatever, too lengthy to explain here, this project has been referred to as, quote, an extension, end quote, which I think is unfortunate misnomer, because we're actually talking about quite literally the last 1/2 mile, it's 2,600 feet, if you will, of needing to deepen the channel to accommodate that part of the channel where economic activity is actually taking place. Dredgers are there now. If we could get the thing funded, we could save probably half the cost of the project. So I'm cautiously optimistic that the OMB, the administration, will see that as an easy win, if you will, for all parties by simply funding this completion at an extremely low dollar rate, relatively speaking. And let me just add that moving ships out of the Houston Ship Channel, which comes up to Galveston Bay, our district, moving them over quicker into the Galveston Ship Channel helps produce a lot better traffic flow in the Houston Ship Channel. So, question for the two of you. Have you all communicated to the OMB the time sensitivity and the environmental mitigation that would occur from releasing funds now immediately so that this project, the last 1/2 mile of Galveston Channel, can be completed for half of the cost while they're working, dredges are there, rather than considering this a new project start or routine maintenance? If we get it done now, lots of money to be saved, lots of benefits. Gentlemen, your thoughts. I'll go to you first, Mr. Secretary. Are you aware of it?
I'm aware of the project in general. I haven't had any specific communications, but there has been a lot of communications back and forth as we look at these work plans that are coming up between the examiners, staff, et cetera. So I appreciate you raising it. I haven't had specific.
How about you, General Spellman?
Sir, what I do know is that we are 95% complete with the design for this final 1/2 mile. I'll be honest, I don't know the history of why this final 1/2 mile was separate from the original authorization. My team thinks we need a new start, but let me go back and do some homework on that to confirm.
Do that, please. I think you'll find that you can't. There's so much bang for the buck. We have a very bipartisan letter coming to y'all. If you hadn't already seen it, Henry Cuellar and there's some others from the Texas group that have signed on. So I'll get that to you. Let me change gears. I got a minute left. Y'all should be in receipt of a bipartisan joint delegation letter that I led with my Texas colleagues regarding the Brazos and the Colorado Lock replacement project on the Gulf Intracoastal Waterway, which is important to me, my district, and of course, the state of Texas. The existing structure creates navigational challenges that impact the safety of our mariners on the waterways. And in fact, these are the most hit locks on the inland waterways transportation system. Let that sink in. Barges, tugs, whatever, these locks get hit frequently. And so to move that product up along, and we all hear about problems with supply chains and everything that's going on with the economy right now, this is a time when we can ill afford something like that. I think this project should be able to be, should compete for the $2.5 billion that have already been made available in the infrastructure bill. And furthermore, the 2020 capital investment strategy recognizes the fact that this project is ready for a new start pending congressional authorization, which it received in Word of 2020. So question, General, how will the Corps update the second plan, the spin plan rather, to incorporate projects that have recently received an authorization, including this one?
Yes, sir. So I've been to this lock, sir, and I've seen some of the abrasions and the contacts there on the structure. And you're exactly right. This is a great project to move forward, and we certainly want to continue to make our best technical recommendation to the administration to fund this work.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. But congratulations again, both of y'all. Good, glad to see you. And I yield back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. I now ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that have been submitted to them in writing. And I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by the members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. And without objections to orders, I would like to thank our witnesses, our two witnesses, for their insightful testimony, and thank our joint staff for their hard work. It was a pleasure seeing you, General, and Mr. Connor. Hope to see you again. If no other members have.
Madam Chairman, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Hey, it's David Rouser here. I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a statement by our colleague, Mr. Van Drew.
So ordered.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If no other members have anything to add, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much, staff.
Thanks, ma'am. Thank you.
Goodbye.